Boom! Blinding light washes out the landscape around you. Several things all happen within a second. First, your vehicle dies as an electromagnetic pulse spreads at the speed of light, killing all unshielded electronics. In the civilian world, that means practically everything. If you were not blinded by the flash of the explosion, you'd see sparks dancing along the high-voltage wires overhead, as they're overloaded with electricity. All modern vehicles that rely on fancy computers and electronic gadgets that make them super efficient and comfortable are now just useless hunks of junk on four wheels. Personal computers, cell phones, even pacemakers are all instantly shut down across a 40-mile radius, and they'll never come back online again. The power grid is absolutely ruined and will need to be completely replaced before it's ever operational again, a task that will take years. You're lucky that you were driving in the opposite direction of the detonation point, because if not, you would have been facing toward it. What's just happened about a mile above your city is the birth of a second sun that burns brightly for just a few milliseconds. That's all that's needed to unleash a billion joules of energy, though. And much of that energy is in the visible wavelength and searing the eyes of anyone who happened to be even glancing in its general direction at detonation. Those within a 2 to 3 mile radius will be blind forever, assuming they survive what's coming next, while anyone outside of that area might be blind for a matter of hours or minutes depending on the distance. Even those who avoided being permanently blinded will likely suffer at least some vision loss as a result. You're safely out of the immediate impact area, but for those who aren't, ionizing radiation tears through their bodies from the detonation. Their DNA is completely unraveled as the ionizing radiation rips through them. It's like taking millions of microscopic shotgun blasts, only these pellets completely disintegrate the very instructions for life. Most people within a half a mile will die immediately from the radiation exposure, if what comes in the next few seconds doesn't kill them, of course. Outside of that range, the effects of radiation poisoning fall off steeply. You were in your car, which protected you from a lot of the thermal radiation, but not all of it. Your arm was hanging out the window, and even at over 2 miles from the detonation point, your arm has suffered some pretty nasty second-degree burns. You're lucky. 35% of the energy from a nuclear explosion is released as heat, and anyone caught out in the open can suffer third-degree burns at a distance of up to 5 miles. If third-degree burns cover 24% of the person's body, or second-degree burns cover 30% of their body, those individuals will go into serious shock, with death imminent. All flammable material directly under and surrounding the blast site catches on fire because of the intense heat. Even at 2 miles out, some of the paint on your car evaporates, and the car door becomes painfully hot to the touch. Tires on vehicles all around you burst as the rubber softens and weakens, while billboards catch on fire. People caught out in the open are consumed in flames as their clothes ignite while they're still wearing them. Some people's hair is literally seared off their heads, leaving behind painful second-degree burns across their scalp. This has just been 1 second into a nuclear detonation. Your car spins out of control as the tires go flat, but you're lucky to come to an abrupt but mostly safe stop. You have barely enough time to look into the rearview mirror before you see what's coming next. Like an invisible tsunami, the pressure wave is now smashing its way across the landscape, starting from the detonation point and radiating outwards. This has been a nuclear attack using an intercontinental ballistic missile, so the explosion took place a few hundred meters above the city. This way, the pressure wave could expand outwards unimpeded by terrain and buildings. A ground impact is highly unfavorable, as it leads to buildings or terrain features absorbing much of the pressure wave and limiting the damage dramatically. Directly below and up to a mile away from the detonation point, the destruction is complete. Buildings are flattened and tall skyscrapers are annihilated, leaving behind only the very core of each building, jutting up a few hundred feet like a shattered skeletal figure. Plenty of sewers and service tunnels crisscross a modern city, not to mention transportation tunnels in the subway. All of these are collapsed, killing hundreds stuck below or trapping them with no hope of rescue. Outside of a mile, the damage falls off, but is still severe. Multiple-story buildings are seriously damaged, leading to many simply collapsing in on themselves or against their neighbors. Buildings with only a few stories are less severely affected, but have every single window blown out and many of their roofs collapse, killing anyone below. At least the tunnels and sewers that crisscross the city here are safe from collapse. Only a few are seriously damaged. Almost no human beings up to 2 miles out survive if caught out in the open. You're just over 2 miles out from detonation, and here the damage falls off once again. Windows are blown out and some roofs and walls collapse, but generally buildings remain standing. As the pressure wave catches up to you, your car is physically picked up and tossed, like an angry kid playing with their Hot Wheels cars. The pressure wave blows your car over and threatens to tip it, but you're too far away and your car comes crashing back down onto all 4 wheels. Debris pelts the landscape around you, and you're mostly safe inside your car. A few people standing out in the street get taken out by chunks of concrete hurtled through the air by a 300-mile-an-hour wind. The roar of a second sun coming to life above your city has been so incredibly loud that you've temporarily lost all hearing. It'll probably return in time, but for those closer to detonation, they could experience permanent or severe hearing loss. A strange silence falls over the city 5 seconds after detonation as a massive mushroom cloud slowly drifts up into the sky. Then the screaming starts. Tens of thousands of people seriously injured, tens of thousands less so. You're now on a ticking clock because you've survived the initial explosion through sheer luck, but surviving what comes next is going to take skills, knowledge, and quick thinking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. You've got 15 minutes before you're dead. What's currently happening and what will kill even more people than the initial explosion is that an ecological disaster is in the brew and about to break out all over you and every survivor in your city. The detonation of a nuclear weapon above your city has sent ionizing radiation all over the landscape, penetrating into the very building materials of the city itself. The thermal flash and pressure wave pulverized all of that irradiated material and turned it into a very fine dust. Then the incredible heat, reaching as much as the surface of the sun for a few milliseconds, creates huge convection currents that suck up gargantuan quantities of air and sends it roaring upward into the sky, hence the mushroom cloud. But all that air is impregnated with billions of tons of highly radioactive dust, and in approximately 15 minutes that dust is going to start falling all around you. You panic because you know what's coming, but you've got a choice to make. You could probably find a working vehicle somewhere and take that to flee the city, trying to outrun the fallout cloud that's about to break over your head. In fact, many people along the suburbs right now are climbing into their cars to do just that. But you're smarter than that. You know that even if you found a working vehicle in the next minute, you could never outrun the cloud of fallout looming overhead. It's being propelled along by winds in the upper atmosphere and will outpace anything but the fastest sports car. Plus, the roads and highways are inevitably going to be choked up with vehicles and other people with the same idea. The particles in the stem of the mushroom cloud will end up falling right back down where they were picked up. Not many people will die from them, but that's pretty much only because anyone under the growing thick black sooty stem of a massive mushroom cloud is already dead from the initial explosion. It's the rest of the billowing cloud that you have to worry about because what goes up definitely comes down. But you're not the only one in danger, as much of the radioactive fallout will reach the uppermost layers of the atmosphere where it will be carried along by strong winds. Massive plumes of radiation will fall for hundreds of miles from the detonation point, poisoning communities entire states away. This is the very reason why Russia might saber-rattle and talk tough about using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but in reality it would only be shooting itself in the foot, as prevailing winds would carry much of the fallout right back into Russia itself. To avoid dying in the next 15 minutes, you have a choice to make. Avoiding radiation poisoning is about 3 things: time, distance, and shielding. The more time you spend away from a radiation source, the safer you'll be, as the radioactive decay, especially in fission byproducts of nuclear explosions, tends to make dangerous particles extremely short-lived. The greater the distance between you and an unshielded radioactive source also means you'll be exposed to less radiation. Meanwhile, shielding takes into account placing barriers between yourself and a radioactive source. If you can't meet the requirements of one, time, distance, or shielding, then you must compensate by adding even more of the other 2 requirements. To survive a nuclear attack, you're going to have to do all 3 though. First, take a look around you. Your first choice, and the absolute worst, is to remain in your vehicle. This will put some shielding and distance between yourself and the fallout. The only good news is that the radioactive debris about to rain down on you is only hazardous if it's extremely close to your body. So if your car can simply physically keep it away from you, odds of survival have greatly increased. You need to put all the windows up and close all the vents, stuffing them with anything that you have available. You can't let there be a single crack. The first radioactive particles to fall will be the size of grains of sand or salt, and these should be easy to keep out. However, over time, the finer radioactive debris will begin to descend, and this can be as small as specks of dust. In fact, you can detect the presence of radioactive fallout after a nuclear explosion simply by seeing coatings of dust on objects. A car is a terrible survival choice, but it's better than nothing. However, an even better choice is sheltering inside a building with a basement if possible. Basements might not seem like the best choice since so much of the fine debris is going to settle in low places, but the key is to choose a basement with as few entrances as possible, and then to seal those entrances as best you can. However, in many modern cities, especially in sunny SoCal, basements are rare. In that case, you want to move to the centermost area of a home or a building and shelter in place there. Staying at the core of a building will add distance and shielding between yourself and the harmful fallout. But if you're going to survive, you're going to have to take some precautions before the radioactive dust starts falling. Hopefully you've got duct tape available nearby, in which case you need to immediately seal all windows and doors with duct tape. A closed window will be fine to protect you from the initial larger grains of debris that falls down first, but every window is leaky and the finer particles will ride in on those air currents, potentially poisoning you inside your shelter. This is why it's important to seal windows and doors with tape and to make your shelter as far away from any window as possible, ideally past several closed doors. Your first priority is securing your shelter, and luckily, you found an intact office building to hide inside along with a few other survivors. Working quickly, you seal off all exterior windows and then taped up the doors leading to the inner core. But now that you're somewhat safe, it's time to get naked. No, you're not repopulating the Earth already, you're avoiding a very nasty death by radiation poisoning. If you were outside at the time of detonation, there's a serious risk that you've already contaminated your clothing with radioactive particle debris. That's why any of you who were outside when the bomb went off need to immediately remove all outer garments and put them in a plastic bag of some kind, then seal the bag off. If possible, put that first bag inside a second plastic bag and store it somewhere far away from you and make sure everyone is aware of its location. You're also going to immediately want to start wiping everyone down. This means using the buddy system to get in those hard-to-reach spots that you can't get by yourself. You're gonna be stuck with your new friends for a while, so what better icebreaker than to get naked and give each other a quick wipe down? You need to remove all exterior contamination from your body so that it doesn't rest against your skin and damage your body with ionizing radiation. You can do this with simple soap and water to scrub away any grime, but even just brushing off with a clean cloth is enough. Afterwards, though, anything that you use to clean each other off with is going to have to go into another containment bag. Never reuse or reopen an old containment bag already full of contaminated material. Now that you've avoided the most imminent hazard, exterior contamination, your next greatest threat, and one that will persist for a while, is interior contamination. This will come from the finer radioactive debris that can get inside wounds or be breathed in and settle into your lungs or along your esophagus. Inside your shelter, your odds of survival are good, but only if you stay in place. You've created distance and shielding, but now you need to add time to the equation. Fallout contamination decays very quickly, with it giving off 80% of its energy in the very first day. However, the debris is still energetic enough to be deadly even after one day. For every 7-fold factor of time, dose rates decreases by a factor of 10. 2 hours after detonation, the fallout will have lost half its energy, but this can still be extremely deadly. Ideally, you'll want to shelter in place for a full 72 hours before leaving your shelter, at which rate remaining radioactive debris will still be harmful, but only if you remain in contact with it for long amounts of time. Unfortunately, your city is going to be a hell-blasted nuclear landscape after an attack, so you'll be in constant contact with radioactive debris even after 3 days. That's why the CDC recommends you wait a full 7 days before leaving your shelter, as this will give you the best survival rates. By that time, radioactive fallout will have a fraction of its original energy and be much less dangerous. At this point, external contamination is unlikely to be a serious threat anymore, but the biggest threat comes from internal contamination. Too weak to penetrate the skin at this point, radioactive debris that gets lodged into wounds or inside your lungs can still be deadly or pose serious long-term health risks. So when you leave your shelter, you want to take precautions against breathing in fine radioactive particles. Face masks like the type we've been wearing due to the coronavirus outbreak are okay, but not great for this. You'd be better off wetting a t-shirt or other large cloth and wrapping it over your mouth and nose. It's important to keep it wet as the moisture will attract fine particles and trap them, and important to cover both your nose and mouth. After any excursion, you'll need to wash whatever protective equipment you've used and all exterior garments. If you can, give your body a good washing down as well, just to remove any fine particles that you might end up breathing in or shoving into a cut or scrape accidentally. Hopefully, you had food and water in your shelter, or at least just water, or you probably aren't making it to this milestone, and your story ends here. But if you've managed to survive 7 days, you're now going to have to think about long-term survival. First, you need to consider if it's best to remain where you are or seek help. Assuming that this was a small-scale attack, there should still be help from the military or emergency response agencies coming to your city. If it was a full-scale nuclear conflict, though, you're probably completely on your own. If you think help is coming, work on increasing the resiliency of your shelter. Improve the shielding to the outside by creating layers of plastic or cloth like curtains that hang in front of the exterior doors. This will help keep radioactive dust down as people go in and out. If you can, simply make suits out of garbage bags to wear over your outer clothing. That way it can be removed and thrown away in specified disposal locations after each trip. If you've got water to spare, create 2 cleaning areas for boots. You can do this by filling 2 buckets with water and dipping your boots into each one in succession. After a few rinses, dispose of the water somewhere so there's no chance of it contaminating you or your shelter. You're going to want to pay special attention to boots and feet, as they'll be the most likely to get saturated with fine radioactive debris since most of it will settle on the ground. You'll also want to make sure your shelter is visible to search and rescue parties who are looking for survivors. Create large geometric shapes made of bright materials to immediately grab the attention of a helicopter or passing rescue vehicle or patrol. SOS is a global sign of distress, but in a city you should be able to find many creative ways of making it obvious that your shelter is occupied with survivors. Make sure to regularly clean your emergency displays to make it obvious people are still alive. Otherwise, rescue workers might simply assume that the shelter has been abandoned. Whether you move out or shelter in place, you'll probably need to find food and water eventually. It should be obvious, but avoid anything that isn't completely sealed in non-permeable material like plastic. Canned goods are excellent options as they're airtight, but even pastas or breads in plastic wrapping is okay to eat as long as the wrapping is completely sealed. Just don't open any food items outside of your shelter, and it's best to wrap them in cloth or plastic as you transport them through the outside world and back into your shelter, though as usual you'll need to decontaminate whatever you use to protect them. You'll also want to get rid of the wrapping material or tin cans after they're done if they've been in an unsecured area where they could have been exposed to outside dust. Water will be trickier because there will almost certainly be no electricity in your city, which means no water pumps to supply water. If you're lucky enough to be in a safe interior location when an attack takes place, immediately plug up sinks and bathtubs and fill them with water, if it's still flowing. Underground water pipes will be safe from the radioactive fallout for a long time, but not forever, as eventually the body of water that feeds them will be contaminated. That's why even if you have running water after an attack, you don't want to rely on it. Better yet, stock up on water bottles, which should be easy to find in shopping centers and corner stores after an attack. Most water bottles are made of thick plastic, which will keep the contents safe even after fallout has descended. However, as usual, you want to decontaminate every bottle of water you bring into your shelter from the outside before you start messing with it. If you can't find water, your best option might be just to start moving and get out of the city, or head toward emergency services. Major airports are a good place to head toward, as it's likely this is where the first rescue efforts will take place. However, if you can't reach one, or if government help isn't coming, survival will still depend on getting out of the city. It'll help if you can figure out which way the prevailing winds are blowing and head perpendicular to them. You don't want to head into the wind because you could just be getting facefuls of contaminated dust. Instead, much like a rip current, head perpendicular and get out of the stream of air that's carrying radioactive waste. Once you're out of the city, your best bet is to head toward high ground. You're safer on the leeward side of a mountain where the wind hasn't blown radioactive dust and debris onto the soil. Radioactive fallout will settle in low areas, and rains and streams will wash it down the mountains and into the valleys and plains below. It would be wise to learn what major drinking water sources are around your city and then head to those that are on high ground. If you can shelter in a safe area for a few months, radioactivity levels and remaining debris should be manageable. At this point, if you're forced to continue living in the area of a nuclear attack, a long, healthy life is out of the question, but you can probably enjoy a moderately long life with few serious health problems. Some radioactive elements will remain deadly for years. Strontium-90, for instance, is still dangerous after 10 years, as is cesium-137. If you can't get away from the site of a nuclear attack, or if your entire nation has come under attack, there's probably little you can do to avoid these dangers, as these elements will become part of the environment itself. But there's a reason why both Hiroshima and Nagasaki are habitable today, and that's because a nuclear attack from another nation will almost certainly be of the airburst variety. A ground-burst weapon is one designed to explode when it hits the ground. This greatly limits its destructive potential, but also causes massive plumes of irradiated material. However, an airburst weapon explodes above its target, so the destructive shockwave and thermal radiation can hit as wide an area as possible. This also comes with the benefit of shooting much of the weapon's radioactive output into the atmosphere or into space. Within days of both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki explosions, people were inhabiting the ruins and living lives with few, if any, health effects. So cheer up, because the end isn't here after all. Now it's time to grab your trusty Pip-Boy and head off into the greatest Fallout LARP event the world has ever put on. Murder. In the next 60 seconds, it's going to happen to you. Well, maybe not you. But with murder being one of mankind's favorite activities, somebody, somewhere is definitely going to get snuffed out. Over 400,000 people are murdered every year, and you could be next. It should be common sense that if you live in a bad neighborhood, you don't go out jogging at night alone. But generally, you should take care to avoid unpopulated areas when it's dark if you can help it. However, the better economically developed the area you're in, the less chance you're going to get murdered. because killers know that cops respond a lot faster to neighborhoods with white picket fences than rent-controlled apartment blocks just off the freeway. While it might be good cover for many a suburban evil Dexter-type serial killer, they're not good hunting grounds. So you're probably okay jogging at 2 a.m. in residential Burbank, but you should seriously consider changing your exercise routine if you live in South Central LA. But it makes sense to avoid activities where a possibility of murder is extra high in other ways. Maybe don't get involved with making drug deals, where the odds of someone getting killed are exponentially increased. We really don't want to push the type of paranoia that makes people not help other people in need. And while you shouldn't be afraid of strangers when you need a lending hand, you also shouldn't be dumb. So if you're stuck on the side of the road and a stranger shows up offering a ride, don't be afraid to take it, but also don't be afraid to acknowledge the potential dangerous situation you're entering into. Take a picture of the car's license plate and text it to a friend, then inform the driver what you've done as a precaution so they're aware that somebody is expecting you home safe and that you have access to potentially identifying information on them. Sure, maybe a little socially awkward, but a good person will laugh it off and probably commend you for the idea, at which point you can then direct them to our channel and tell them to subscribe. But a killer will immediately be turned off from making your skull a future coffee mug because they know their chances of remaining anonymous have just been shot. Along with a picture of the license plate, don't be afraid to ask for a picture of the driver themselves. If they refuse, then you're no worse off really. Just sit in your car and wait for help. You might have just saved your own life. Also, make sure to send your friend details on what you're currently wearing, where you'll be picked up from, the time, and an estimated time of arrival. It's also a good idea to have a duress phrase already pre-planned with your family or friends. This is a certain phrase that you don't use very often, but you could drop in a conversation to immediately alert those who know that you're in danger. In the US military, this technique is often used so that if an individual is ever forced to act against their will, they can alert others to that fact covertly. Some examples of duress phrases are simple things that your friends and family would know are out of place, like, "I really loved those red boots you bought me," or "Kurzgesagt is a better channel than the infographic show." You know, that type of completely unbelievable thing people around you would immediately know you'd never say and thus signal that you're in trouble. All of these details will be great for helping solve your murder later, and police will be really super appreciative of your cooperation. But the entire point is to avoid getting murdered in the first place. That's why it's important to alert your Good Samaritan to the fact that you've notified someone that you're being picked up or helped by them and that they're expecting to hear from you. Information is deterrence in this case, and if you happen to be unlucky enough to have gotten picked up by a serial killer, they'll almost certainly move on to their next victim instead. It doesn't hurt to also pay attention to people around you or in your life. Do you have a neighbor with blacked out windows who does a lot of late-night trash runs? They're either a vampire or a serial killer, and, well, we suppose that in this case there's very little difference between the two. Since you're at the greatest risk of getting killed when you're alone though, pay attention to the way people are dressed around or how they act. Is someone in your vicinity unusually dressed for the weather? A killer might try to hide their identity to a degree by wearing things that make identifying them harder. Bulky clothing also makes it easier to hide a weapon. This should be an especially alarming sign at places like concerts, movie theaters, or a typical American school. Contrary to popular opinion though, it's not the social outcasts you should be watching out for. Most times, serial killers are very sociable people who are adept at putting you at ease and gaining your trust. Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy were both described as wonderful people by friends and family, and yet both were horrific monsters. Bundy was notorious for gaining the confidence of women he stalked by being personable, charismatic, and even faking illness or injury. While you've been keeping a wary eye on that big tattooed biker a few bar stools down from you, the wimpy guy that you've been knocking back drinks with all night and laughing about the latest episode of Last Week Tonight is already making mental measurements of your femur to see if it'll fit in his stew pot or if he'll have to saw it in half instead. Serial killers are social chameleons because they understand that their very survival depends on them being the last person suspected of actually being a murderer. Ted Bundy was even on a civilian crime advisory board. The truth is, though, that you're more likely to be killed by someone you know than by a serial killer. That's why it's in your best interest to keep good relationships with those around you and to understand the motivations for people's behaviors. There's no real good advice to give here because these types of killings are typically passion murders, meaning they were killings that were unplanned and happened in the heat of the moment. There's not much you can proactively do to protect yourself from being murdered this way, except maybe practice a bit of prudence. Don't make it a habit to argue with people. It's a pretty stupid and useless thing to do anyway, so think back on every argument you've ever had and ask yourself if you've ever actually changed anyone's mind. Try to avoid things that might set someone off. If you're married, maybe avoid cheating and getting caught in bed with your spouse's sibling. That's exactly the type of thing that leads to a crime of passion and ends up with you in the morgue. While hopefully it'll never happen, you might find yourself in a situation where someone's trying to murder you anyway. In an ambush scenario, there's sadly little you can do, though typically most ambush killers are quick to run away so as to avoid being caught. Here, knowing some basic first aid can be a literal lifesaver, as those killers might not stick around to make sure you've bit the dust. Apply pressure to all wounds and try to elevate them above the heart. This will slow down blood loss because it's harder for the heart to pump blood uphill. Don't change out bandages even though they're completely soaked in blood. This will only tear off the clotting that's already begun, and the wound will bleed freely once more. In case of serious uncontrollable bleeding in a limb, learn how to tourniquet to cut off blood flow completely. You'll likely lose the limb but save your life. If you're in a situation where you have to fight, having learned some self-defense beforehand can make the difference between life and death. First, if you can run, run. Any self-defense teacher worth their salt will tell you that the best option in any situation is to simply run away. Your goal should always be to fight back long and hard enough to create an opening to simply run away. Serial killers are a lot like animal predators, and if a victim fights back hard enough, they tend to give up. That's because the harder you fight, the longer you take to die, and the greater chance of them being accidentally discovered. Many victims have saved their own lives by fighting so hard their killer simply fled, looking for easier prey elsewhere. One surprising tactic to keep you alive, however, is to simply remind the person trying to kill you that you are a human being too. Whether it's a premeditated murder by a deranged serial killer or a crime of passion, humans are generally hardwired to be turned off at the thought of killing another human being. It's one of the reasons why in militaries around the world, even veteran soldiers are discovered to be shooting high and missing targets on purpose. If you can remind the killer of your humanity, it might make them feel theirs. Talk about your life, your family, your job. Make yourself a real person in their eyes, not just another faceless victim. Don't beg for your life, because many killers get off on the power trip of killing, but instead talk about the people who depend on you. Even better, bring up any shared interests, ideologies, or beliefs. Nothing makes someone more real in another person's eyes than realizing you have the same thoughts on important things. Again, many victims have saved their own lives by simply talking to their would-be killers, and several serial killers have admitted to aborting a planned kill when their victim suddenly became too real in their eyes. This can help even in a crime of passion, as talking about the people who would be affected by your death can suddenly make the consequences of killing you real for an angry friend or sibling or even a lover. Don't bother talking about the chances of getting caught. That'll simply make them angrier at you. Just talk about your family, especially if you share family members. Talk about your kids, even talk about your dog. People are suckers for dogs because dogs are amazing. Just bring up anything that humanizes you and overcomes the blind, passionate desire to kill. It's finally happened. The world's gone all topsy-turvy and the leaders of the world have decided enough's enough. It's time to settle every score on the book in one major, titanic brawl. Winner take all. It's East versus West, North versus South, capitalism versus communism, fanboys who think The Mandalorian was a good show versus people with actual good taste in television. The gloves are off and the world is at war once more. Luckily for you though, you're one smart cookie, and you subscribe to The Infographic Show, the internet's best resource for cataclysm survival stories, awesome challenges, and more than a fair bit of informative sass. Thanks to your excellent viewing habits, you're better prepared than most to survive the end of the world. Basically, you're a pre-order customer for Fallout 76 and are getting a 1-week head start on the Armageddon over everybody else. If, of course, Fallout 76 wasn't literally the worst video game ever created and nobody who likes fun should ever play it. To survive the end of days, you're gonna have to be prepared and be ready to respond even before the end officially starts. So what in the world should you be on the lookout for before you pack your bags and join in the world's biggest Fallout LARP event? If not dying in radioactive fire is on your top 10 list of favorite things, then good news, because despite what the disaster-hungry media might be screaming at you every day over the TV, internet, Facebook, and even the sad half-dozen of you that still use livejournal.com, the truth is that the world is more peaceful than ever. Now, just because the world is more peaceful than it's ever been doesn't mean that there's no conflict or even a lot of them. So pump the brakes on blowing up our comment section for a sec and hang in there with us. Violence has been on the decline across the spate of human history, though it's only in the last century that we've seen significant progress towards turning the earth into one giant hippie commune. Simply put, we as individuals are more adverse to violence than we have ever been in our history. In the 16th century, France's idea of public wholesome family entertainment was to gather the community together for a good old-fashioned cat burning, where a cat was tied to a rope and then slowly lowered into a roaring fire. The cat would shriek in pain until it finally died, and all the while the gathered crowd would roar with laughter. If you think this type of entertainment was limited to the lower classes, by the way, you'd be wrong, as it was all the rage amongst the aristocracy as well. Today, though, no sane person would think that lowering an animal into a raging fire was good entertainment. In fact, that person would be harshly punished by law enforcement nearly anywhere in the world. As societies, we've come to abhor violence and actively work to prevent it or avoid it whenever possible, or at least limit its impact. Small-scale conflicts are still common throughout the world, but only in the less developed parts. The developed nations of the world are almost universally stable and peaceful, something which would have blown the pantaloons straight off your cat-burning 16th century ancestor. For them, a world without the constant threat of a major war existed only in fiction. For your average First and Second Worlder, the only war they experience is the endless flame wars that rage across the comment section of anything, literally anything posted online, because someone somewhere always hates you and what you have to say. At least today, they just call you names instead of bashing you over the head with a rock. Despite the relatively peaceful state of the world, though, there is still a serious risk for World War III, and that risk is concentrated amongst several potential flashpoints. The top three are an Eastern European confrontation with Russia, a confrontation with China in the South China Sea, and a confrontation with China over Taiwan. A confrontation with Russia in Eastern Europe would likely be the result of further Russian aggression against Ukraine, which could trigger a retaliatory response from NATO, despite the fact that Ukraine is not a NATO member. This is unlikely, though, as Russia has no appetite for a major war, though the fact that Ukraine is determined to become a NATO member by 2040 certainly ramps up the risk of war. A more likely scenario for a third global war would be a confrontation between the US and China in the South Pacific or Taiwan. The US has repeatedly affirmed its commitment to defend Taiwan from China, and for China allowing Taiwan to remain free and independent is an ongoing national embarrassment that the Chinese Communist Party may not be willing to tolerate for very long. China will never be taken seriously as a global military power if it can't even retake a single island right off its own shores. So let's say it happened and the US and China started shooting at each other and Russia decided, screw it, it's cold in Siberia and we're bored. Time to kick off World War III. How in the world are you going to survive? If World War III goes nuclear right away, then sorry, you're not surviving. That's it. Video over. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the nearest vault. That might sound a bit defeatist, but when we're trying to show you how to survive, we're hoping we can give you a game plan that will keep you alive for a few decades, not a month or two before you starve to death or become an irradiated corpse. In the case of a full nuclear release, the first weapons will be impacting within 15 minutes depending on where you live, meaning you have exactly 0 time to get to safety with enough supplies to last you. We hear you, Billy Bob and Ray J. Well, I live me in the country. I ain't no soft snowflake like you city folk. Alright there, Deliverance, hold on to your suspenders, because we got bad news for you. You're dead too, and all your wilderness survival skills or YouTube prepper subscriptions aren't going to do you a lick of good. You may survive the initial volley that targets major population centers, but what you won't survive are the secondary volleys which specifically target major water supplies and arable land. A full nuclear exchange is designed to not just militarily or economically defeat an opponent, but to completely obliterate a nation from the face of the earth and ensure its people cannot survive. Radiation-rich weapons can irradiate vast swaths of territory and make water undrinkable and farmland unworkable for decades. Your only hope of surviving World War III and perhaps living to the ripe old age of 40 is if the war is a slow burn that doesn't immediately turn nuclear. If you're an American, Canadian, or Mexican, then congratulations, because you won the geography lottery. And for the first few months of the war, the only noticeable effect will be a seriously slumping economy. With 2 huge oceans on either coast, no enemy on Earth can breach the geographic barrier that protects North America. In our US versus the world video, we showed you how the US Navy is big enough to fight all the world's navies combined to a standstill. And the world doesn't have enough transport capacity to actually get troops to North America. That means that all the fighting will be overseas, which gives overprivileged North Americans lots of time to prep their shelter for the end of the world. If you're Asian or European, you're screwed. Not only will most of the fighting be happening on one or both of these continents, but they will be the hardest hit economically by a third world war. While North American countries can still trade with themselves, and even South America, war-torn Asia and Europe wouldn't have that option. To make matters even better, the first nuclear weapons that fall will be in these places. This will likely come in the form of small-scale tactical nuclear strikes, which inevitably will be escalated to a full nuclear exchange. If war breaks out in Europe, the best thing you can do is get as far west as you possibly can. The Great European Plain spans across Eastern Europe and reaches into the northern half of Western Europe. Historically, this plain has been all but undefendable, and no nation has suffered more for it than Russia. Thanks to the vast European plain with little defensive features, Russia has been repeatedly invaded by other European powers for the last several hundred years. Historically, major powers have fought to expand their influence across the European plain. The further into the plain they could push their boundaries or influence, the deeper they could stage their forces. This meant that they could then launch an attack against a neighboring power using any number of different avenues, and the defender would be spread perilously thin trying to cover them all. The European plain is the single greatest reason for why Russia has historically fought to push its influence westward, especially after suffering so terribly at the hands of invaders. If war were to break out between NATO and Russia, Russia would immediately launch a series of tactical nuclear strikes, not against actual military targets, but rather into the territory of the Great Plain itself. By irradiating the land, Russia would force NATO to funnel its forces into fewer and fewer avenues of attack, giving the Russian military a chance to stop NATO cold in its tracks. For NATO's part, they would be doing all they can to spread out across the plain and to push into Russian territory across many different fronts. One can quickly see how the European plain is a tactical disaster for the Russian military, and why NATO's expansion on its borders angers Russia so much. By heading west, you'll avoid most of the initial fighting and the effects of the tactical nuclear strikes by Russia meant to funnel NATO forces into defensive corridors. A single miscalculation by Russia, though, whom has already publicly declared it would use nuclear weapons and a first strike capability against NATO forces, would quickly escalate the conflict. And soon, major European cities would be the target of nuclear strikes. The safest bet for Europeans would be to simply leave the continent altogether. The best hope would be found by crossing the Mediterranean into Africa and into the Middle East, where there are few military or economic targets for nuclear strikes. In a complete reverse of the recent refugee crisis, this time it would be the Europeans flooding African and Middle Eastern nations seeking asylum. Good thing you guys have been treating your asylum seekers so well, right? For our Asian viewers, the good news is that as long as you don't live in China, India, or Pakistan, there's few valid military or economic targets for a nuclear strike. While most Asian nations favor the US and the West, few of them are allied close enough with the United States to warrant having a Chinese nuclear weapon lobbed their way. For the Chinese, well, aside from Pakistan, nobody is really China's friend on the world stage, at least not friend enough to join it in a war against the US. Most people would be tempted to flee to Australia, thinking themselves safe in the land down under, except Australia is a resolute ally of the United States and on really bad terms with China. Tensions between Australia and China only became worse with the recent defection of a Chinese intelligence official to Australia, which provided information on covert and espionage action against Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Australia. Then there's also the fact that the United States and Australia jointly operate several key military facilities which would be critical in a war against China, meaning it's time to say goodbye to Australia and its 10 million venomous animals because nuclear attacks against that nation is guaranteed. Instead, Asian survivors should seek to leave populated areas behind and return to the countryside. With so much of Asia still living an agrarian lifestyle, the region may perhaps be the best suited for surviving a full-blown apocalypse, or at least for the first few months. Once widespread debris from a global nuclear war has brought about nuclear winter, then the crops will begin to fail all around the world, though it will be the rainforest areas of Asia that are hit first and hardest. Crops there are especially vulnerable to cold, especially rice, which is a staple crop for billions of people. Luckily, a lot of the initial predictions for a nuclear winter have in time been discovered to be overblown. Instead of the freezing cold nuclear winter of old, the world would most likely experience a nuclear autumn with a drop of 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. That would drop a balmy summer day of 75 degrees Fahrenheit to 57 degrees. Sadly, that's far out of the tolerance range for most major crops, and what crops did survive, such as wheat, would be in extremely low yields. Mankind would starve to death as crops wither and animals die. To make matters worse, giant dust storms would constantly spread irradiated material across the globe, making the air itself deadly to breathe. It's highly unlikely that all of humanity would die, but most would, and the reality is that the few survivors that did make it would probably not be able to kickstart the human race before a natural extinction event simply took them out. Maybe if you happen to be a Bigfoot with internet access watching our videos, you might survive. But for the rest of us though, it's lights out. It happens all too often in college, but increasingly it's even happening to tourists of all ages in various parts of the world. Think it can't happen to you? You're wrong. Drugging is carried out for a variety of reasons, and while we've all grown accustomed to drinks being spiked in clubs and bars around the country, increasingly criminals are turning to drugs in places that might surprise you. In 2017, a 20-year-old vacationer made his way to the swim-up bar at his exclusive Mexico resort. Soon after, he drowned. The suspected culprit? Either purposeful drugging by the bar staff or someone at the bar, or compromised alcohol served by the bar itself. In another case, two teenage brothers from Minnesota woke up in their underwear and covered in mud after imbibing drinks at a resort south of the border. They'd been drugged and robbed of everything except their underwear. In yet another case, a married couple was drugged and woke up hours later with no memory of what happened. The husband was found to have an injury similar to a boxer's break, a type of broken hand typically suffered from delivering repeated forceful punches. Perhaps no drug is more feared though than scopolamine, the zombie drug that's starting to spread throughout South America. Originating in Colombia, the drug is also known as the devil's breath and is used in alarming frequency, with upwards of 1,000 incidents a year in Bogota. No normal roofie, scopolamine blocks neurotransmitters that carry information to the part of the brain that stores short-term memories. In a devilish 1-2 punch though, the drug also affects the individual's ability to make decisions and makes them incredibly open to suggestions. Victims have been known to do almost anything asked of them by the drugger, including emptying out entire bank accounts or opening up home safes. One man was drugged by a partygoer at his home, and when he came to, all of his valuables, including a stash of money he had hidden away, were stolen. The victim had willingly led the thief to his secret hiding stash. But the drug is used in more nefarious crimes as well. In 2012, kidnappers drugged a family and took their 7-year-old daughter. She was rescued 2 months later, but the investigation was seriously hampered by the victim's inability to recall anything about the perpetrators. In yet another case, women preyed on by men rubbing the drug on their body and inviting men to take a lick. The men would become completely incapacitated and open to the women's suggestions, who would then hold the men hostage for 3 days as they emptied out all of their financial accounts and handed over their valuables. Incredibly, in Bogota alone, a whopping 20% of ER visits are related to criminal poisoning, with upwards of 50,000 scopolamine-related crimes a year in the entire nation. Now the drug is spreading around the world, with cases popping up in Thailand, and rumors are the drug may have finally come into use here in the US. Still think drugging can't happen to you just because you're careful? Surviving being drugged begins with prevention. First, be aware of your surroundings. If in a foreign country, stick to the highly traveled tourist watering holes. Bragging about ditching the yuppie resorts to get to know the real locals by pounding tequila in a crappy dive bar might make for a cool story, but it's also a recipe for disaster. Resorts live and die by their reputation, and even local communities often rely heavy on tourism for their economies. A bad reputation or one too many shady incidents is all it takes to create a global panic, and suddenly tourists stop showing up. That's why most popular tourism destinations take great pains to keep their guests safe. And the moment you step out of that safety bubble, you're in the jungle, sometimes literally. Still, you should do some research before planning your next getaway destination. Have there been any previous drugging incidents at this location? Any history of unexplained illnesses? If so, time to skip on that resort and find a new one, ideally far away. But no matter how careful you are, sometimes you can't escape local corruption. It's believed, for instance, that some of the drugging cases in Mexico lately weren't drugging cases at all. Instead, it was simply bad booze. Up to 43% of all alcohol created in Mexico is done so illegally in unregulated, under-the-counter operations. This can mean serious defects in the finished product, sometimes with fatal consequences. It may pay to ask your resort beforehand where they source their alcohol if you plan on drinking. You should also be wary of overly friendly locals. You shouldn't be naturally mistrustful of people, but if a local is a little too friendly in offering up free booze, maybe take a skip on that offer. It might seem a little rude, but better to be briefly rude than end up a statistic. However, our next tip applies both for travelers and the average Joe sitting at the local bar. And yes, even men can be drugged for nefarious purposes. In fact, it's more common than you might think, though the end result is typically robbery. Over the years, there have been several incidents of women drugging men in order to steal their valuables. First, watch your alcohol at all times. If you can, keep an eye on your alcohol as it's being made by the bartender. Sometimes an offender will be in cahoots with the bartender, and the pill or powder can be slipped in while the drink is being made. If your bartender is spending a lot of time with your drink out of view, don't be afraid to cancel your order. You don't owe the bar anything until you physically take the drink from the bartender. Once you've got your drink, keep a close eye on it. Try and always make sure your drink is within line of sight, and avoid anyone you don't know who insists on being just a little bit too close. Most druggers are skilled at sleight of hand, and some close physical proximity and a moment's lapse in awareness is all they need to spike a drink. It can be helpful to get in the habit of physically covering your drink whenever strangers get a little too close, and under absolutely no circumstances should you leave your drink unattended. If you've got to use the bathroom, go in turns so someone's always watching, or simply order new drinks. Remember, a moment's lapse in awareness is all you need to end up a victim. It goes without saying that accepting drinks from strangers is a bad idea. If a stranger buys you a drink, refuse it unless the bartender made it themselves. If he or she approaches with a drink already in hand, that's pretty sus. Politely refuse the drink, but tell them you'd happily accept one made fresh by the bartender. On that same note, never share your drink with someone you don't trust. Not only are bar drinks typically ridiculously expensive, but sharing a drink or letting someone you don't know or trust just have a sip gives them the opportunity to slip something inside it. What if, despite all your vigilance though, the worst comes to pass? What do you do now that you've been drugged? First, get in contact with someone you trust immediately. Most agents used for the purpose of roofing or drugging people are very fast-acting and can mimic drunk symptoms as a good cover. You should know yourself pretty well though, and if you suddenly start feeling strange or a lot more drunk than you should be, contact someone. Grab a friend or even the bartender if you have to. It's important to act fast because time is extremely limited and soon you may not have any control over your actions at all. If there's no one around you trust, call 911 immediately and give them a good description of yourself, including your race, age, sex, height, weight, and what you're wearing. You want to make yourself easy to spot for responding officers. Next, get somewhere as safe as realistically possible. If you're overseas and near a resort, get back to the resort ASAP. Don't even worry about paying your bill. If the bar calls the police on you for dipping out on a bar tab, they're basically doing step number 1 for you. It'll be easy to clear up a ditched bar tab if you don't end up a victim. If you're at home and somewhere public, try to get to an authority figure if possible. If no police are nearby, try a bouncer or a bartender. They're typically trained to spot this kind of thing and take appropriate action. Ideally, you'll have a friend with you though, in which case you want to stick by their side. Next, start drinking as much water as you can. This will help dilute the drug and get it through your system as quickly as possible. Some drugs can also leave you extremely dehydrated, which will only make the coming symptoms even worse. Whether it's tap water or bottled water, this is no time to be picky. Just get as much H2O inside of you as possible as quickly as possible. However, maintain vigilance over where you're getting your water from, which may be difficult in an increasingly impaired state. There's no point in treating symptoms of being drugged only to get drugged again. As you start making your way to safety or chugging down water, one thing you want to do is record the time you started feeling strange. A good way of doing this is to simply send yourself or a friend a text. The timestamp will allow you to later recall exactly where you started feeling symptoms. This can help doctors figure out when you were actually drugged, creating a timetable that can be useful for police investigation into your case. It can also give doctors an idea of exactly what drug you were given and how to best combat it. Whatever you do, never leave a location alone or with people you don't trust. A perpetrator may be happy to wait out the drug until you're completely incapacitated before making their move, or they might seek to try to usher you out of the location you were drugged at while you still maintain some semblance of self-control. In either case, make sure you aren't left alone, and when leaving a location, have someone you trust come with you. Lastly, you need to get to a hospital ASAP. If you're here in the States, an ambulance ride might cost you a few $1,000s if you don't have insurance, but is infinitely better than the alternative. If overseas, you should have a list of local emergency numbers and medical facilities on hand before you go out to party. Making and having a plan is the best way to stay safe, and you should always be aware of where you can turn for help in a worst-case scenario. Being prepared can make all the difference should the worst happen to you. If going to a party, you should always go in a group and appoint someone to remain sober who can care for the group. You should also get in the habit of continuously checking in with group members throughout the night. If you're underage, don't be afraid of getting in trouble for drinking by helping a friend who feels unwell get to the police or a hospital. Many places make exceptions for underage drinking if you're assisting someone in a medical emergency. Lastly, be proactive about protecting not just yourself but others. If you see someone spiking a drink, do something about it immediately. Confront the person directly, dump out the drink, and alert a bartender or authority figure. Sadly, as numerous social experiments have shown, including the famous TV show What Would You Do?, many witnesses to individuals drugging drinks often say nothing, or perhaps wait until the drugger and the druggee have made their exit to alert the bartender. You might be the last chance somebody has to avoid a tragedy, so if you see something, do something about it. Maybe you've been attacked by an evil serial killer. Today we're going to save your life by teaching you how to survive being strangled. You might already know this from our other videos on how to survive a stab wound or how to survive being shot, but the first step of surviving being strangled is to not get strangled in the first place. Why do we bring this up? Because strangulation is one of the go-to ways for deranged serial killers to end the lives of their victims. Often it's a power fantasy. Strangling is quite literally holding someone's life in your hands and slowly squeezing it out of them. So pay attention to your surroundings, especially if you're a woman and it's late at night. Even more specifically if you're a woman plus a person of color from a low socioeconomic background whose odds of being the victim of a serial killer are statistically greater than anybody else. Why? Because of the less dead phenomenon, where people with incomes below the poverty line and minorities have throughout history been considered less dead by a society that barely considered them to exist while they were alive. And thus, police don't work quite as hard to find their killer. Their deaths tend to slip beneath the public radar, and only if the crime is particularly gruesome will you find them on the front page even today. Killers know this, so they target these populations. People without homes and those engaging in especially risky and often non-legal professions are particularly vulnerable to serial killers. But it's not just the most defenseless and exposed who are at risk. Literally anyone can find themselves stalked by a serial killer. So avoid letting that deranged maniac wrap their hands around your throat in the first place by being aware of your surroundings. Has that stranger been traveling in your same direction for a few minutes? Maybe you're going the same way. Or maybe they're plotting how best to watch the light fade from your eyes. Try making a random turn and see if they follow. Or you could cross the street and see if they do the same. If someone is mirroring you for 1 or 2 random turns or street crossings, odds are good they're following you. Immediately get to somewhere public or make a loud enough ruckus that you draw attention to yourself. Serial killers need anonymity and privacy to be successful, and if a victim is drawing attention to them or themselves, it's gonna spook one away. But what if worse comes to worse, and that maniac has ambushed you and is getting ready to choke you to death? First, how does strangulation even kill? Pretty simple, really. A good chokehold can stop you from drawing air into your lungs, which will eventually suffocate you and lead you to passing out. Interestingly though, strangulation is rarely enough to actually kill. Typically, after someone is strangled, death comes by some other means, as you can survive a few minutes without oxygen. Most people will experience an automatic breath reflex that kicks in even after they're being knocked unconscious by a lack of air. And if your attacker isn't continuously choking off your air, you can self-resuscitate. To ensure a good kill, a strangler really needs to hold their stranglehold on your neck for a few minutes at least. If you're not dead by then, you'll have suffered so much brain damage that you might as well be. So, how to survive strangulation? First, fight. In our modern civilized society, we don't have much need for our old fight-or-flight instincts that kept us alive on the savannas of Africa. But you can bet bottom dollar that in a life-or-death scenario, those evolutionary instincts will come screaming back to the forefront of your mind. But running isn't an option, though if it is ever an option, do it. Every self-defense expert in the world, at least the good ones, will always teach you that running away is the best option. In fact, unless you're a professional fighter, any self-defense you learn should be focused on opening up an opportunity to run, not to defeat your opponent. Your body will release a jolt of adrenaline, and you need to lean into that. Once your air has been cut off, you'll have upwards of a minute, if you're still in good shape, to still be able to fight back. If you're not in good physical shape, then we've got really bad news for you. You might only have as little as 15 seconds before it's lights out for you. If you ever needed a motivator to exercise, maybe not getting murdered will do it for you. With the release of adrenaline, your muscles are going to get a massive boost. Unfortunately, without oxygen feeding them though, you're on very borrowed time. Your body will also release natural painkillers to suppress any wounds you've already suffered, or might in the course of the fight for your life. Now it's time to lean into those natural advantages. First, whether your attacker is coming at you from the front or behind, you need to pay attention to Wu-Tang and tuck your chin down to protect your neck as best you can. With your chin in the way, it'll make it very difficult for an attacker to actually get their hands around your neck or their arm if they're trying to put you in a traditional chokehold. If your attacker is coming at you from behind, once they're physically close to you, there's a few options to defend yourself, and you'll want to try them all. First, if you happen to be wearing particularly sharp heels or perhaps a very heavy person, a foot stomp can be surprisingly effective at making someone disengage. To do this, lift your foot up and place it over theirs, then use the heel of your foot to stomp down on their foot as hard as you possibly can. Using the heel will make the total contact area on their foot much smaller, which means you're delivering much more force into a smaller area, maximizing damage. A good foot stomp versus someone that isn't wearing protective footwear can even crush a bone. If the foot stomp doesn't do it, a heel strike to the shin just might. Have you ever banged your shin against a coffee table by accident? It hurts worse than the crushing despair of your student loan debts. Now imagine someone kicking your shin with their heel as hard as they possibly can. But you can always try to aim a few inches higher and go for the knee. Knees are surprisingly fragile, and a good knee strike will absolutely ruin your day. You want to kick backwards with your foot flat, striking the knee head on. This time, you actually want to maximize the striking area because you want to strike as much of the knee as possible. While you won't likely break a kneecap, you can cause serious damage to the ligaments. With enough force, you could actually cause the knee to bend in the wrong direction. If your strangler is still choking you out after that, he is seriously committed to the effort. Your elbows can be very effective as tools as well. In fact, many martial arts will teach newcomers to strike with their elbows rather than their fists, and with good reasons. A badly formed punch can hurt you more than the other person, and elbows might feel funny if they take a hit in the wrong way but are pretty tough. Plus, you can put a lot of force behind an elbow. With your attacker behind you, your best bet would be aimed for the kidneys. This is a notoriously painful area to take a hit in, and a strike with enough force will actually cause devastating internal bleeding. With your attacker behind you, this is probably going to be the easiest area to strike at too. Now it's time to get dirty. In a fight for survival, there's no rules, and it's time to get downright primitive. The ears are often overlooked, unless you're Mike Tyson, but are an extremely vulnerable part of the body to attack. Reach up behind you and grab those ears, then pull downward as hard as you possibly can. Imagine that you're going to tear the ears off. That's how hard you should be pulling. If they're wearing jewelry like earrings, great. Rip them off and keep pulling. It's best if you can secure a hold by wrapping your entire hand over the top of each ear rather than tugging at the bottom, as you can easily lose your grip that way. If you can reach, partner up your ear tears with some bites on your attacker's arms and hands as they choke you. In fact, anytime your attacker puts any part of their body near your mouth, bite. The jaw muscle is one of the strongest in the body, capable of even crushing bone. Make your attacker pay dearly and rip chunks of flesh out of him if that's what it takes. What if your attacker's coming at you from the front though? The knee and shins are once again perfect targets, but you're going to need room to get a good kick in. Grab your attacker's hands and pull downwards. Then take a step backwards with your strong leg. This will give you some room to get a good strong kick going, but also pull your strangler slightly forward and put them slightly off balance. Then deliver a kick as hard as you can with your strong leg, ideally straight into the kneecap. This type of kick has a very strong probability of shattering a kneecap, or at the very least causing so much damage that they're gonna need medical help to repair it. But don't stop there. As long as you can manage it, continue kicking. There's no such thing as overkill, and as long as your attacker is leaving themselves open, continue striking. Keep in mind that everything we've listed so far are options. There are no perfect scenarios where you can follow a step-by-step guide for disabling an attacker, so everything we're teaching you should be in a toolbox. You should be able to pull out the proper tool for the proper job. Another tool to add to your toolbox is a good knee strike, though this time it'll be your knee doing the striking. An attacker trying to choke you out from the front is leaving his entire front unguarded and exposed. A good knee strike here will wreck someone's day. The most obvious target is the groin, and for good reason. Whether you're a man or a woman, the area brings us the greatest physical pleasure and also crippling pain. You're going to need room for a good groin strike though, and you can achieve this by either putting your hands against their chest and pressing back, or taking a step back with your strong leg like with the kick to the kneecap. Having a lot of room will help you build up velocity with your knee, which in turn equates to more kinetic energy. Bring your knee smashing into their SpongeBob and SquarePants as hard as you can, and if one doesn't do the trick, repeat as necessary. The good thing about being attacked from the front is that your attacker is very kindly presenting a whole host of vulnerabilities for you to exploit. Remember what we said about fighting dirty? Well, we're gonna get downright filthy. First, we'll start with the throat. If someone's trying to choke you out, why not repay the favor? A good throat strike can be lethal. With enough force to the front of the throat, you can actually collapse the trachea. At the very least, you're gonna stun them and knock the breath out of them, which can open up an opportunity to escape or continue your assault. Next, we're back to the ears, which you're welcome to grab once more and tear downwards. However, if your hands are free, you can do one better. Bring both your hands out to your sides and stick your palms out the way you would if you were preparing to execute a palm strike. Then bring your arms in as hard and fast as you can, landing a devastating palm strike to both your attacker's ears. Not only is this incredibly painful, but it can ring someone's head, stunning them. However, if you aim directly behind the ears, you can actually strike a part of the skull that will cause a reverberation in the head, and with enough force, instantly KO an opponent. This sweet spot is approximately 1.5 inches behind the ear hole. Let's talk noses. They're weird when you think about it, sort of like flesh chimneys, but they're also easy to break and very painful to get hit in. If your arms are free, lift your hands above your head. This time, wrap your fists together to perform a hammer strike. Then bring that hammer down directly onto the bridge of the nose of your attacker as hard as you can. Unless your attacker has been in several nose-breaking fist fights, the shock should be enough to at least weaken the strangulation attempt. But let's talk about the scriptwriter's personal favorite, the eyes. They say the eyes are the window to the soul, and we're gonna break some windows and claw that soul right out of your attacker's skull. Warning, Eye gouging is not for the faint of heart, and is a move you better be completely dedicated to executing. If your attacker recovers from a half-hearted eye gouge, well, if they didn't want to kill you before, they definitely will now. Wrap your hands around your opponent's head, with your thumbs over their eyes. Then apply inward pressure as hard as you can. Ideally, you want to try and maneuver each thumb toward the inside of the eye, close to where the eye meets the nose, or on the opposite side, rather than straight on. This way, as you apply full pressure, your thumb will follow the curvature of the eye as guided by the eye socket. Slip inside the socket itself. This is actually how they used to conduct lobotomies. Your goal is simple: crush the eyes or gouge them out. With enough pressure inwards, the eyes will actually begin to hemorrhage, which will lead to, at minimum, temporary blindness. However, if your thumb can slide inside, you can apply sideways pressure that will actually pop the eye out of the socket entirely. At that point, if your attacker is still choking you, grab the eye and yank it downwards. Eyes can actually be popped out of their socket by accident and remain attached by the optic nerve. By yanking downwards, you can tear the eye free of the optical nerve and permanently blind your attacker. Eye gouging is pretty much a one-way street. There's no way to moderately eye gouge someone. Once you're executing an eye gouge, you're going to be causing permanent harm, so be sure it's a life or death scenario before resorting to this technique. The world's a tough place, and sooner or later you're gonna get hurt. Today we're gonna look at how to survive the most common injuries you may suffer in your life. Number 4. Stabbing. Getting stabbed sucks. We know because we asked our resident challenge expert about his run-in with the wrong end of a sharp knife, and we'll let him explain. I was overseas, door-to-door stuff. Went through a door at the exact same time as a bad guy coming out. We both surprised each other, and as we ran into each other, we both dropped our rifles. I went for my sidearm, he went for his knife. I was just a second slower on the draw than him because of my body armor and the way I landed, and he pounced and slid a short knife into my side straight into my armpit. So what's the best way to survive being stabbed, whether on purpose or on accident? First, the best way to survive being stabbed is to not get stabbed. If someone pulls a knife on you, it's time to turn heels and elbows in the opposite direction. Don't try to be a hero or a Billy Badass and just book it. But what if there's nowhere to run? In that case, remember the 5 Ds of dodgeball. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. But alright, if you forgot the 5 Ds of dodgeball and you couldn't run away, how are you going to survive a stabbing? First, if you're able to, try to direct the stab to somewhere favorable. The human body is basically entirely a no-stab zone. But if you must, there's better places to direct an incoming stab than others. Places to avoid include your flanks, which will allow a knife to penetrate deeply and pierce one or more organs. A stab in the upper flank is especially dangerous, and our lab rat is lucky the incoming stab was in a generally upwards direction that completely missed his lungs. Lungs are extremely allergic to being stabbed, but a stab in the lungs has twofold dangers. First, you'll compromise the lung's ability to remain inflated and do its job, meaning you've seriously compromised your ability to breathe. Secondly, a punctured lung can fill with blood, leading to a disastrous secondary effect to your health like a rapid death or a slow gurgling death as you choke to death on your own blood while asphyxiating. So, where do you want to take a stab? If you're able to, put your forearms up and block or deflect the incoming blow. Even if the knife slips past your guard, you'll take a lot of kinetic energy out of the attack, limiting the penetrating power of the stab. You'll potentially get your forearm slashed to ribbons, but better than taking a knife through the ribs. By the way, prepare for some intense pain if the knife manages to ram straight into your forearm bones. A less ideal but more survivable location is to take a stab in the stomach. Stomach injuries are excruciatingly painful, but very survivable if you can get medical attention within 30 minutes to an hour. The recovery process will be extremely long, and you run the risk of serious internal infection if your stomach is ruptured and the contents spill out inside you. After you've been stabbed, whether on purpose or by accident, the next important thing is to administer first aid as quickly as possible. If the impaling object is still sticking inside you, resist the urge to go all Rambo and rip it out. Instead, leave the object inside you and wrap a bandage around it, pressing firmly to stop or slow the bleeding. Pulling out the impaling object will open the wound up. As long as it's inside you, it's basically sealing the wound. If you've been stabbed or impaled in the chest, the most important thing to do is seal the wound as quickly as possible. That's because if air gets into your chest cavity, it can fill up the chest cavity and put pressure on your lung, which prevents it from expanding fully. This is known as collapsed lung and will lead to asphyxiation. A good way to treat a sucking chest wound is to use a piece of plastic directly on the hole, and then press firmly using gauze or a dish rag or a piece of torn t-shirt, whatever's handy to staunch the bleeding. Number 3. Getting shot. Maybe you're hanging out at a shooting range or an American public school, and suddenly it happens. You get plugged. How are you going to survive getting shot? First, it's important to assess the situation and get yourself to safety. Is whoever shot you still shooting at you or in the general area? Ask them politely to stop. If they refuse, get to safety. No point in surviving your first gunshot wound only to have to deal with an immediate second. Next, it's time to apply some immediate first aid. Because unlike a stabbing, a gunshot wound is typically exponentially more destructive to your internals. That's thanks to the massive shock and expansion your body experiences as a round penetrates, which can result in the creation of a brief internal cavity which your organs snap back into. You're going to be experiencing major blood loss, which, if you don't take immediate steps to address, will have you unconscious in as little as 30 seconds and dead in 60. So no matter how much bleeding there is or isn't, always treat a gunshot wound as if you'll be unconscious and helpless in 30 seconds, which means move fast. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s, immediately forget everything you saw in the movies about digging the bullet out. First of all, it's in no way immediately important to remove a bullet. Second, the bullet will likely have fragmented into dozens of tiny pieces requiring delicate surgery to find and extract. Third, sticking a knife inside you to dig out a bullet is a good way to complement a bullet wound with a stab wound. The first thing you want to do is stop or slow the bleeding. Immediately apply pressure to the wound with your hands, while you or a buddy tries to find a more suitable bandaging material. Once more, improvisation is key. A torn t-shirt, wad of paper towels, your annoying friend's screenplay that they won't shut up about. The only thing that matters is the material is absorbent enough to take in some of the blood and seal the wound tightly. Ideally, you'll want to use clean material, but a dirty dish rag lying in an alley will do in a pinch. You can deal with a blood infection after you've stopped littering the streets with said blood. Now, maintain pressure, and whatever you do, do not change the bandaging until a doctor or EMT does it for you. Even if you used a filthy rag and later find something much cleaner and are worried about infection, ripping off the bandaging will tear loose the blood clot that's hopefully forming to keep your Kool-Aid on the inside. Now that you got your immediate wound taken care of, check for an exit wound. Odds are, when you get shot, your body's going to respond with adrenaline, steroids, and a whole lot of natural painkillers. Given enough blood loss and a state of mental shock, you might not even feel any pain. Many soldiers have died after having one wound treated only to ignore the second wound they didn't even realize they had. That's right, the brain is a tricky thing, and if one wound is readily apparent but the second isn't, it can completely shut off the pain signal from the second wound as it struggles to deal with the shock of the first. Plug your exit wound the same way you did the entry wound, then make a move for safety or help. If help is already on the way, it's time to conduct a more thorough assessment. Carefully inspect the rest of your body for additional gunshot wounds or secondary wounds and treat each accordingly. We hope you're never in this situation, but we cannot stress enough how important this step is. If you've been shot in an extremity, elevate the wound while you wait for help. Unless the wound is on your torso or your head, you also want to keep your head at the lowest possible elevation. This will ensure that gravity helps blood flow to your brain and keep you conscious and alive. Number 2. Car crash. Given the frequency of auto accidents, it's bound to happen. Sooner or later, you're going to be in a car crash. Hopefully, it'll be of a less severe nature. First, wear a seatbelt. Seriously, it's 2021 and we can't believe we still have to tell people to do this. Wearing a seatbelt can reduce your chances of a fatal injury by 45% and of a moderate to critical injury by 50%. Seatbelts are even more useful in trucks, where they reduce the risk of fatal injury by 60% and a moderate to critical injury by 65%. It's not enough to just wear the seatbelt though, you have to wear it properly. The upper part that crosses your chest can be uncomfortable on long car rides, or maybe it puts a total crimp in your style. But not wearing it can be just as bad as not wearing a seatbelt at all. Even worse, wearing the lap band only can lead to very serious pelvic injuries, especially for men who happen to like having a fully functional reproductive system. Next, you want to sit as upright as possible in your seat. Kicking your feet up on the dash is a great way to not only lose your feet, but have your knees smash through your face and turn your brain to pudding. If you're in the front seats, the deploying airbag can cause serious injuries to your legs and put you in a position in the subsequent crash that will have a greater chance of catastrophic spine or leg injuries. Next, if you see the crash coming, avoid throwing your hands up in a panic. The deploying airbags could cause serious injuries to your arms, hands, and even face in a game of stop hitting yourself that the airbag will definitely win. The best thing to do is instead keep your body as loose as possible instead of tensing up in anticipation of the crash. You probably heard of newborn babies surviving incredible falls or car crashes with relatively few injuries. A big factor in their survival is the fact that babies remain loose, allowing their body to better absorb and redistribute the incoming kinetic energy. Once the vehicle has come to a stop, conduct an immediate safety assessment. Even before you start tending to you or your passenger's wounds, you want to check the environment to see if it's safe. If the vehicle is on fire, or if you've landed in a ditch that's quickly filling with water, your first priority is to get yourself to safety. No point in treating wounds if you're just going to burn to death or drown. If your environment is safe and your wounds are serious, remain in the vehicle. Don't try to exit the vehicle as you could have spinal or head injuries you aren't aware of. It's generally best to remain in the vehicle until emergency services personnel extracts you themselves. Only leave the vehicle if necessary for safety's sake, or to treat a life-threatening injury with first aid. This also applies if you find yourself at the scene of a car accident. Leave the victim in the vehicle unless absolutely necessary to move them. Always allow medical personnel to make the decision to move an individual. If you come across a car accident victim that's been ejected from the vehicle, the same rule applies. Move them only if there's a safety risk. If possible, treat any life-threatening injuries without moving them, as once more you could make a spine or head injury exponentially worse by moving the victim. Number 1. Acid. For the last decade, there's been a persistent trend in men attacking women with acid, with the goal of splashing it on their faces. The aim of the attack isn't so much to kill as it is to horribly maim and disfigure. Whatever the cause of your run-in with acid is, knowing what to do can not only save your life, but seriously reduce the scarring of an attack. If the acid is in powder form, first try to reduce your exposure by vigorously brushing it off your skin. You can ideally do this with a shirt sleeve or gloved hand, but vigorously brushing it off with a bare hand will not leave much time for the acid to work on your flesh. If the acid is in liquid form, don't attempt to brush it off with your hand or any other body part, even if it's protected. This will only spread the acid around, making treatment much more difficult and potentially increasing future scarring and disfigurement. Instead, immediately flush water over the affected area and continue doing so until emergency medical services arrive. Water will help dilute the acid, and if applied quickly enough, can help prevent permanent disfigurement. If water isn't available, use any other type of liquid on hand. Milk is also ideal, as it'll help neutralize the acid, as well as products with a high concentration of water such as beer. The key is to pour as much liquid as possible for as long as possible, diluting and washing away the acid. If the acid's gotten to the eyes, immediately flush them with water and continue flushing them with water until help arrives. Make sure to pry open the eyelids and get water under the eyelids, as the acid can come to rest there or be pushed there by the water. Next, remove any clothing affected by the acid and move from under the puddles formed by the water treatment to prevent secondary injury to your feet or legs. You can hardly believe this day is finally here. You've worked tirelessly for months to claw your way up the leaderboard, and now all that's left for you to do is ride that elevator up to the arena floor and take your place in video game history at the Fortnite World Cup. What could possibly go wrong? As the elevator doors close behind you and the car starts to rise toward the arena, you feel a shudder and then nothing. The elevator isn't moving, you're stuck, and panic immediately sets in as you frantically search your brain for any clue as to what to actually do if you're trapped in an elevator. No, 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 you yell as you frantically mash buttons on the elevator's control panel to no effect. This can't be happening. Not right now. You can't believe your whole life is about to be ruined by a broken elevator. You've worked so hard to get here and you absolutely can't miss this opportunity. You've always loved video games, maybe a little bit too much. Your parents certainly don't understand it, but it wasn't until you saw the first ever Fortnite World Cup that you realized there might actually be a future for you in video games. After 13-year-old Kyle Buga Gearsdorf won the tournament and the $3 million prize, you were inspired to take your favorite hobby from pastime to career. As your blood pressure rises and you break out in a cold sweat, your panicking brain starts to come up with some crazy ideas. You remember watching the Die Hard movies as a kid and picture John McClane's Spider-Manning around the building's elevator shaft. How did he do that? Think, think, think. You look up, there's an air vent in the roof. You could pop it off and you might be able to crawl out of the top of the car. You jump up and try to reach the grate, but it's just too far out of reach. Right about the time you're balancing on the hand railing and trying to reach over to pull down the grate, you realize what a dumb idea this is. How are you going to pull yourself up through the hole? A year of full-time gaming certainly hasn't done any miracles for your biceps, and even if you could get through, then what? Where would you go? And what if the car suddenly starts to move? You shudder as you imagine taking a wild ride on top of a runaway elevator car and you climb down from the railing. Okay, so climbing out the top isn't an option, but you need to get out of here now. Think, what can you try next? As you stand there, panting, it hits you. Of course, the door. You just pry it open and climb out. Simple. Why didn't you think of that first? You waste no time and quickly start working the doors apart. It takes quite a bit of effort for you to pry open the heavy doors, but eventually you're able to wedge them partially open. It looks like the car is stuck halfway between floors, but the gap looks plenty big enough for you to slip out. You poke your head through the door and take a quick look around the floor outside. It looks mostly deserted except for a janitor mopping at the end of the hall. As you're plotting out the best way to crawl out of the elevator, you hear footsteps running toward you and someone shouting, "Whoa, what the heck do you think you're doing? Are you crazy?" You step back into the car just as the janitor reaches the door. He lays down on the floor and peers through the gap at you, looking terrified. "What were you thinking? Are you trying to get killed?" he shouts. You start to explain about the tournament and the elevator and your dreams and how it's all falling apart, and just as you're starting to really get worked up, he stops you. "It's okay, you're gonna be fine," he says, softening. "You just need to stay calm. We're gonna get you out of there." Stay calm, you think? How can you possibly stay calm right now? Seeing your distress, the janitor starts talking. "Lucky for you, I used to work in New York City, and this ain't my first elevator mishap. In fact, I have a proven 3-step process to follow when you're trapped in an elevator. Interested?" Interested? You've never been more interested in anything except video games in your life. Yes sirree, I sure know all about elevators," he says. "Did you know that in the year 2015 alone, 51 people were injured and 5 people died in New York City elevator accidents? It's such a big problem that the mayor did a whole big old campaign about it. That's how I know all about this 3-step plan. They put ads all over the town, on the buses, the papers, on the radio. 'Stay put, stay safe' was the tagline. You're trying to be patient and hear him out, but the clock is ticking and all this chit-chat isn't helping you get out of here. That's great and all, you say, but what's the first step to get me out of here?" The janitor smiles. "Step 1, he says, is don't panic." You're about to start yelling again when he cuts you off and continues. "You're no good to yourself if you're so panicked that you're not thinking straight, and no one's going to be able to get in there and help you, so you might as well take some deep breaths and chill the heck out." You realize that he's right, so you try to take some slow, steady breaths and calm your racing heart. Eventually, the combination of the breathing and the janitor's calm presence and rambling stories seems to be working, and you can feel some rational thought returning to your brain. "Okay," you say, "I think I'm ready for step 2. "Right," says the janitor. "This step is very important, so pay attention. I want you to look at the control panel and find the emergency button. It's probably a big red button." You immediately flush with embarrassment. How could you be so stupid? The emergency button. Why didn't you think of that in the first place? As if he can read your thoughts, the janitor says, "Don't beat yourself up, kid. There's a reason that step number 1 is don't panic. It's hard to think straight when your brain is going a mile a minute." Feeling slightly better, you press the emergency call button, and within a few seconds you're connected to the stadium's maintenance department. You explain what's happened and where you are, and the person on the other end tells you just to hang tight and that help is on the way. Sure, you think as you disconnect you'll hang tight. What else are you gonna do? Step 2, the janitor says, is call for help. By law, every elevator has to have an emergency button of some kind, but if for some reason there isn't one, or if it's not working, well, you better start banging on those doors and hope someone hears you. The last thing you want to do is try to climb out on your own. You never know when the thing will start back up or let go, and that's how people get themselves killed. You understand what he's getting at, but as the minutes slip by with no sign of rescue, you start to think that you're gonna have no choice but to take the chance and crawl your way to freedom. Almost as if he can tell what you're thinking, the janitor pipes up again. "Are you ready for step 3? he asks. In your relief that help is on the way, you almost forgot that there was a step 3. "Sure," you say, humoring him. "What's step 3? "We wait!" He laughs as if he just said the funniest thing in the world. You fail to see the humor in it. No matter what, it's going to take some time for help to get to you, and even some time for them to be able to get you out safely once they get here, so you might as well get comfortable. He can tell that you aren't buying into step 3, so he goes on. Now, this may not seem like an important step at all, but panicking in a situation like this can get someone hurt. Keeping calm and keeping the mood positive is a key step. If you're alone and you have a cell phone on you, that could be a useful distraction. So can a book, some deep breathing, or some mental games. If you're with other people, playing some icebreaker games can help ease the tension and keep the mood positive until help arrives. "Don't worry, kid," he concludes. "I'll keep you company until the help gets here. Let's see, how can we pass the time?" You have an idea. You're not sure it's a good one considering the circumstances, but you have nothing better to do and you can't help but be curious. You decide to go for it. "Hey," you start tentatively. "Back when you worked in New York, you said you saw your fair share of elevator mishaps. What do you mean by that?" "Oh, sure," he says. "In a city with more than 70,000 elevators, you'd be hard-pressed not to have some first-hand experience with one gone wrong. I remember my first one. It was New Year's Eve. A young man who was attending a party at the building saved the life of one of the residents when he pushed her out of the elevator as the car let go and began to fall down the shaft. He was trapped between the elevator and the door and ended up dying later at the hospital." He shakes his head sadly. "There's 2 types of elevators, you see. This here's an older hydraulic model, runs on fluid-filled pistons that move the car up and down. That one was a newer electric model, uses counterbalance weight to raise and lower the car. The counterweight must have let go somehow. You know, there was another one, though, that still haunts me to this day. So sad because it could have been prevented. The elevator was overloaded, so when it stopped at the lobby, it wasn't level with the floor, and this man was too impatient, so he tried to get off the elevator, but as he stepped through the doors, the car started moving again, crushing his head and chest. So sad. He trails off, lost in thought. Just as the reality of your brush with death starts to sink in, help finally arrives. A team from security shows up and tells you to stand back while they lock out the elevator and make sure it's safe for you to exit. The second they give you the all clear, you leap from the elevator and fall gratefully to your knees on the solid ground of the hallway. But your relief doesn't last that long. You have a tournament to win. You scramble to your feet and race to the nearest stairwell. No way are you getting on another elevator. You don't have a second to spare, so you shout a thank you to the janitor and sprint for the arena, taking the stairs 2 at a time. January 3rd, 1943. During an air raid, B-17 bombers darkened the skies over Nazi-occupied Saint-Nazaire, France. An attack from German anti-aircraft artillery rips through a gun turret on one of the planes. Thankfully, the gunner, U.S. Army Air Force Staff Sergeant Alan McGee, is unharmed, but his parachute has been shredded. Suddenly, more flak blows off part of the plane's right wing, setting the bomber aflame and sending it into a deadly tailspin. What happens next is miraculous. McGee blacks out and is thrown clear of the plane. He falls over 4 miles, some 22,000 feet, and lives. He crashes through the glass roof of a train station, suffering severe injuries. However, German doctors nurse him back to health, and McGee spends most of the rest of World War II as a POW. Interestingly, Sergeant McGee isn't the only person to have survived falling out of an airplane. On January 26, 1972, Vesna Vulovic, a flight attendant, was the sole survivor after a bomb exploded aboard the JAT Yugoslav Airlines flight JU-367. She fell some 33,330 feet, earning a spot in the Guinness World Records for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. Also, who can forget brave Juliana Kopka, whom we profiled in our episode She Fell 10,000 Feet and Survived 11 Days in the Amazon Rainforest. Juliana survived an incredible 2-mile fall and then a trek through the jungle while severely injured. We don't even think we could survive a 2-mile jog, let alone a fall. How common is it to survive falling out of an airplane, though? Is there anything you could do to improve your chances of surviving? The median lethal dose for falls is 4 stories, or about 48 feet. This means that 50% of people who fall from 4 stories will sustain fatal injuries. It only gets worse as height increases. At 7 stories or 84 feet, the chance of survival are 1 in 10. So unfortunately, the chances of survival in falling out of an airplane are pretty slim. No official statistics exist, however. According to various aviation accident websites, there are less than 50 known cases of survival when falling from a plane. That would include falling out of an airplane without a parachute like Sergeant McGee, or falling attached to airplane debris like Vulovic or Kepka. If you're gonna survive the plummet, it's better to fall from the cruising altitude of a commercial flight, which is typically around 35,000 feet, rather than a shorter distance of 1,500 feet. That sounds a little crazy, but hear us out. Falling from around 1,500 feet, or a distance just a little taller than the Empire State Building, means you'll reach your terminal velocity before you hit the ground. As gravity pulls you toward Earth, you fall faster. However, at the same time, your drag increases. When downward force equals upward resistance, acceleration stops, and you'll reach the fastest speed you'll descend at, or your terminal velocity. For average adult humans, this is around 120 to 130 miles per hour. So the impact speed is the same whether you fall from 35,000 feet versus 1,500. What's different is time. 1,500 feet is going to only give you approximately 10 to 12 seconds of free fall before impact, while falling from 35,000 feet or over 6.6 miles will give you about 3 minutes of free fall before you potentially become a pancake. Actually, before and as you fall out of the plane, if possible, grab a hold of plane debris. Becoming a wreckage rider, a term coined by Jim Hamilton, creator of the Free Fall Research website, a database cataloging known free falls, can help you survive the plunge by adding some protection and even somewhat cushioning your fall. Also, the larger surface area of the debris increases air drag, slowing your descent. Flight attendant Vulovic felt jammed between her seat, a catering cart, and the body of another crew member, and a section of the airplane. Though she was severely injured, being enclosed in debris helped to shield her from the worst of the impact. Based on statistics from plausible freefall incidents, you're more likely to survive if you're attached to debris than a freefall solo. While free-falling from 35,000 feet, you have enough time to possibly make some very quick decisions on how to mitigate your impact. However, there are drawbacks from falling from such a high distance. At higher altitudes, it's extremely cold. The temperature at 35,000 feet is often in excess of negative 67 degrees Fahrenheit. A reaction to the cold or rapid change in temperature as you drop is possible. However, there are no reports detailing how individuals have been affected. Frankly, temperature is the least of your worries. At 35,000 feet, oxygen is thin. It's likely that you'll experience hypoxia and spend roughly the first minute of your fall unconscious. You might stay unconscious for the duration of your fall and be spared the last few terrifying moments of your life, but most likely you'll come to once you've fallen around 2 miles. Of course, how fast you're falling and how quickly you regain consciousness are tied to several variables that we cannot account for, such as air currents, the trajectory at which you leave the plane, your mass, and personal blood oxygen saturation level. Once you awaken, you'll have around 2 minutes left to execute any strategies for survival. The first thing you want to do is calm down. We get it, it's extremely hard to adopt a Zen-like attitude when death is most likely imminent, but take a deep breath and try anyway. Although you've regained consciousness, your body is still feeling the effects of hypoxia. If you panic, it's really easy to hyperventilate, slip back into a blackout, and lose valuable freefall seconds you could be using to mitigate your injury or fatality. You need all your wits about you to focus on planning your landing. You cannot do that if you're freaking out. Great, now that you've taken a split second and gotten a hold of yourself, the next thing you want to do is to attempt to slow your fall and gain a few extra seconds of precious freefall time. A good position to create wind resistance is the classic skydiver's pose called the box. To assume, flip onto your stomach and arch your back, lifting your head and shoulders slightly. Spread your arms and legs equal distance. Bend your arms at the elbow. Also, bend your knees about a 45-degree angle, leaving your lower legs slightly extended into the wind. Not only will this position help to slow your descent a little, in skydiving it's considered a neutral, stable freefall position from which other maneuvers are performed. From the box, you can move into the slowdown position. Lower your head, turning it to one side, straighten your arms, and further extend your legs, spreading out into an X. Flatten your torso, point your feet and toes as much as possible, and tense your muscles, deliberately pushing against the air. This position provides the greatest resistance possible. If you start to wobble or flip, return to the skydiver's box posture before trying the slow fall position again. Now, take a quick look around. It's unlikely, but you may have a second chance at grabbing a hold of some plane debris to cushion your fall. If suitable wreckage is falling nearby, you may want to try to angle yourself toward it so you can grab on. Skydivers form formations before deploying their parachute, so it's possible to steer toward and grab a hold of objects while falling. However, maneuvering during skydiving does take practice, and generally, it's not something you do on your first jump. Remember, time is at a premium, and it's better to get yourself in the best position possible for impact rather than crash land in a poor position because you were chasing debris. Whether maneuvering to reach debris or aiming for a landing spot, here are some basic moves for steering. From the box position, to turn yourself left, deflect more air off your right arm than your left by moving your left arm down and your right arm up in equal proportion. Imagine an airplane banking. That's exactly what you're doing. To turn right, do the reverse, right arm down, left arm up. You continue to turn according to your arm actions until you resume the neutral box position. Another common skydiving move is tracking or moving horizontally while free falling. For a basic side tracking stance, from the box position, straighten your arms and legs. Bring your arms to your side and rotate them out slightly so your palms are facing downward. Flatten your back, lower your head, and curl your body in just a little. Frankly, you're not going to have much time to think about proper skydiving form, so do whatever movement that seems to alter the direction of the drag force acting on your body to try to produce the desired motion to guide yourself. Your next step is to look down for a suitable landing area. It's best if you can land on or in anything that offers give, such as a tree canopy, haystack, or a snowdrift. Swampland or grass are better than plain ground. Even power lines are preferable to the ground because they break your fall. Any ground cover that spreads your impact over a longer period or absorbs it in stages could mean the difference between a couple of broken bones and severe trauma to internal organs. Try not to land in water. It can be as dangerous as landing on concrete. Firstly, you have no way of determining depth. Even when the water is deep enough for landing, once you break the surface of the water, your velocity drops almost instantaneously to zero, exerting strong G-forces on your body. If you must land in water, try to minimize impact by assuming postures that cause a minimum surface area of your body to bear the brunt of the force. That would be a pencil dive position. Jump feet first with your arms held slightly to your sides and your feet pressed together and pointed downward. You're striving to enter the water in a straight vertical line. Also, clench your muscles, especially your butt muscles, unless you want a painful and damaging forced enema. Among experienced cliff divers, injuries such as broken bones, spinal compression, and concussions occur. Even if you survive the dive into the water with only a few broken bones, you may be stunned and slow to respond. Watch out, it's easy to ingest water and possibly drown. To minimize body impact on landing, many researchers think the best posture to assume is one similar to a parachute landing fall. That means landing on the balls of your feet with the legs together and your knees a little bent. Immediately allow your body to crumple slightly backwards and into a horizontal position while turning toward one side of your body as determined by dominant directional speed. Basically, you're attempting to distribute the force of the landing step by step up your torso along 5 points of body contact with the ground: feet, calf, thigh, hip or buttock, and the side of the back. Also, you should tuck your chin and wrap your arms around your head for protection as you land. Furthermore, relax your body as much as possible. This allows you to use your body's natural elasticity to help slow things down over a greater unit of time. Ultimately, you're sacrificing the long bones in your legs, which can absorb a large amount of impact energy before fracturing, for the good of your torso. No matter how you land, of course, you want to try to protect your head and neck as much as possible. Landing head first almost certainly guarantees death. It's late and the house is quiet. You're lying in bed getting to the end of the episode of the infographic show, What Happens When You Die. You think you hear a thud on the lowest floor. You hit pause and listen. Nothing. It was probably just a cat doing its late-night prowl thing. You hit play. But at that moment, 3 men burst through your bedroom door, all of them wearing hoodies, their faces hidden by gas masks. No sooner than you drop your phone, the men have your arms and are wrapping duct tape around your mouth. They don't utter a word. They're not here to kill you, they're kidnapping you. As you're manhandled out of the bedroom, you can just about hear the audio on the phone. See you next time. What you don't know is there are things you should be doing right now. The fact is, some kidnappees are better than others, as in the case of Machine Gun Kelly and the crime that finally brought him down. This was the kidnapping of a wealthy businessman named Charles F. Urschel. Urschel was what you might call a very smart kidnappee. Why was that, you might ask? Well, old man Urschel might have been blindfolded, but he was aware immediately that he had to start taking mental notes. You take one now. If you get kidnapped, get over the fright and start thinking. The men put Urschel in a car, and even though the tied-up man couldn't see a thing, he knew that he had passed 2 oil fields that were about 30 minutes apart. How did he know that? You guessed it, he smelled them. He thought he could also hear pumps. All this time, he's been kind of counting the time as best he could. He knew that when they stopped for gas, the time was likely around 3:30 a.m. He later told the FBI that it took about an hour for them to arrive at a house. There was a gate that he heard being opened, and there was a second gate, all noted by Mr. Urschel in what turned out to be a formidable memory. That house wasn't where they kept him, though. Urschel was pushed into another car there, and because he felt around the back seat and heard the noise it made, he guessed it was likely a Cadillac or a Buick. He then started counting again and guessed it took about 3 hours for the next stop, which was a gas station. Old Ursch pricked his ears again and overheard a conversation at the station, which would be very important. He later told the FBI this is what he heard. "The crops around here are burned up, although we may make some broom corn." They started driving again, and he noticed there was a big rainstorm, like really big, and the men even stopped the car. After that, they drove on, and when they finally stopped, one of the men made a silly mistake and told Urschel the time. He was then led inside a house and a room that had 2 beds. His bed was an iron cot. He also heard the voice of a woman in the house, even though his abductors had filled his ears with cotton. Some days later, he was taken to another house 15 minutes away. There, he heard barnyard animals, and he also heard a man and a woman in another room. But he hadn't heard those voices before. He kept memorizing this. And if you've seen our show on how to be a memory master, you'll know that old Urschel could have easily remembered everything he had experienced so far. To cut a long story short, over the course of a few days, he heard various animals. He heard a well being pumped, and he knew that the well was northwest of the house. He heard a rope and a pulley working. He also realized that each morning around 9:45 a plane would pass overhead. Okay, so you amateur abductees, if in his shoes, might have been feeling sorry for yourself and dreaming of bacon and eggs, but Urschel was decoding his surroundings all the time. An important thing he noticed was that one morning it rained really hard and the plane didn't fly overhead that day. What happened next is the kidnappers got their cash, and they took Urschel to a town and released him. He then went to the police. So when he talked to the FBI, what did he tell them of value? Well, he thought that he knew what car he'd been in, he knew the driving times to each destination, he knew what the house might look like and what might surround it. He also knew about weather conditions and, importantly, the time he could hear the plane. On its own website, the FBI writes that meteorologists of the United States Weather Bureau of Dallas, Texas was contacted. People there said from what Urschel had said about the rain, he might have been at the place called Paradise in Texas. It made sense given what he said about travel times. This was a place that had recently seen some corn burning. The FBI also wrote that if he was really held at Paradise, then that would make sense too because he would have heard a plane each day around 9:30 a.m. They looked at the records to see if anyone of importance lived in Paradise, and lo and behold, they got a name. We won't go through the whole case again, but we will tell you thanks to Urschel's private snooping, the kidnappers were eventually all arrested. So tip 1 when you get kidnapped, note everything in your mind and keep telling yourself the story. Your kidnapping should read like a really descriptive novel or short story in your head, and you must tell that story over and over again so you don't forget it. Like any good author, Urschel envisioned the room he was in, the animals and the well outside, the plane and the rain. But Urschel, to some extent, was in good hands. Those guys weren't out to hurt him but get the money and leave him alone. They were actually alright with Urschel in terms of how they treated him. With your kidnapping, that might not be the case. Maybe you're just an average person and you or your parents don't have much cash. That won't deter a sadistic killer. He doesn't want a payoff. He wants to look in your eyes as he snips off some of your most treasured body parts. Maybe he just wants to show you some wicked love before he finally decides to strangle you with his mother's stockings. You might also be the victim of a gang that just needs an innocent person for some leverage with the police. This has happened many times. So don't think just because you're an everyday guy you won't ever get kidnapped. Gangsters and serial killers might sometimes have a victim of choice, but some of them embrace equal opportunities when it comes to choosing someone to abduct. First things first, your kidnapper likely doesn't want to kill you right away. But if you kick and scream and fight and make things difficult for your captor, well, he or they might just finish you off there and then. If you really can't get away, then accept that and later look for more opportunities. If you can win the fight, fight. By the way, if you get stuffed into the car trunk, you should look for a glow-in-the-dark cord. Pull that when the car is stopped and it'll open the trunk. Get out and scream like you've never screamed before. Run, victim, run. If there's no cord, you could also try and take the lights out and stick your hands out. Even the more apathetic driver on the road will likely call the cops and report a human waving from a taillight. Of course, there's a big difference from someone who wants to put your removed wiener in a roll and eat it, to someone who is merely holding you to thwart the police. But in both cases, it might help to create a rapport with your captor. Peter Vronsky, possibly the most important writer today on serial killers, said in his books that there have been cases of killers letting people go. So don't blow your lid and don't start giving your captor a hard time about his body odor. If he is what you'd call a psychosexual killer, you'd want to keep him calm and make him like you. If your captor is just a mean gang member, then remain calm and keep that mind of yours working. If they ask you to do stuff, just do it, don't complain. Any chance you get to make yourself human like a real person, exploit it. The notorious serial killers Ted Bundy and Ed Kemper both let people go. It's very likely that they didn't want to deal with a real person. If you get a chance, humanize yourself, and that goes for any kind of kidnapping experience. Bundy once let a girl go, and she said he told her, "It's your lucky day, little girl, get the hell out of my car." She thought she had seemed too real for him. Kemper once let a person go after he spilled pills in the car and the person commented that her father was on the same meds. That was too real for Kemper, and even he asked about her father's condition. She got to go and didn't end up as decapitated playhead under the big man's bed. You can talk about stuff, incidental stuff, but not your kidnapping or your abductor's intentions, what you learned in psychology class about freaks, or why he's making a big mistake. If you see a story you like, talk about it. If a song comes on the radio, chat about that. Just keep things real. Of course, we're not saying don't try to escape if you see a way out, especially if you're at the mercy of a demented killer, but you should meticulously plan your escape. If you get caught trying, that might be the end of you. If you can get your hands free, great. But first, survey where you are. Are the doors locked? When does he sleep? What do you think is outside? Is there anything nearby you can use as a weapon? How fast can he or they run? If you're sure you can get away, then do so, but take precautions. But let's say you're not going anywhere for a while. You're waiting, and you know to be calm and create a rapport with your captor. To be brutally honest, if your captor is the kind that is as warped as Ted Bundy, the fact that you're still alive is a miracle. Still, you have to keep calm. Your composure might keep you alive longer, and hey, living with trauma is better than decomposing with the worms. Don't even cry in front of this person. Speak to them kindly if you can, and don't get worked up. Don't lie to him. Don't think you can manipulate him. So don't pretend you're best buddies or you're actually enjoying the experience. He will see through that, and it might just expedite your death. You are not friends, but you're also not a threat or an annoyance. If you're being held by a gang, don't start asking questions about these people. Even if you're being held by a killer, don't ask questions, since knowing stuff about people gives you a lot less chance of them releasing you. The less you know, the better. You can pick up stuff just by observing. Now, for some real practical stuff. Just to stay comfortable, you might try and stretch as much as you can. To keep your mind in a good place, try and meditate and focus on breathing. Do this when there's nothing you can observe. When you're being held for money or for leverage, the longer you're there, the better chance you have of getting away in the end. These people likely don't want to kill you since they want something in exchange for your breathing body. Murder is the last resort, and it can mean a death sentence for them if they're caught. Bear that in mind. Unfortunately, the psychosexual serial killer kidnapped you to live out a fantasy, and his intention was always to get rid of you once he had fulfilled his evil desires. If making yourself real didn't work, you might just have to rely on the mercy of God or the cops or the small chance of him just retiring on the spot. Terror, hallucinations, paranoia, psychosis. The effects of sleep deprivation aren't just devastating. They can last for life. But just how long can you survive without sleep? T plus 24 hours with no sleep. You're drowsy, but that's nothing new. Most people have gone a full day without sleep several times in their life, and you're no exception. You know you're prone to becoming irritable with people the longer you go without sleep, so you do your best to stay away from others. You immediately close your Facebook and Twitter tab because you definitely don't have the patience to argue with your uncle who still thinks the coronavirus is a hoax. Not if you don't want next Thanksgiving to be a complete disaster. You're still trying to catch up on schoolwork, but you're finding even simple questions difficult to answer. It's definitely taking you longer than it should to answer which Union Army general went on to become president after the Civil War. You keep reading that question to yourself, trying to make sense of it. Worse yet, you know that you just reviewed this material a day ago, but you're having a lot of trouble with your short-term memory. T plus 30 hours with no sleep. You gave up on schoolwork. It's impossible to concentrate now. You sit down to watch some TV and are shocked to discover an entire hour's gone by in what seems like just a few minutes. On the flip side, that Postmates you ordered was supposed to take 25 minutes to get here, and it's taking an eternity, but when you check the app, only 10 minutes have passed. This is making you even more irritable, and you're snapping at friends and family over the slightest provocation. Sleep may not come, but that doesn't mean life doesn't go on. You've got to drive yourself to work, and you're terrified to realize that you've driven entire stretches of road and have no memory of it. Were you asleep, or is it just more short-term memory problems? The fact that you don't know is terrifying, and you are extremely relieved when you finally pull up to work. You have no idea how you're getting through the next 8 hours. Your back and shoulders are aching something fierce, and when you hold your hand out in front of you, it's shaking noticeably. T plus 36 hours with no sleep. You've had to leave work early. It was either that or tear off a customer's head. Concentrating on people's orders was almost impossible, requiring every ounce of willpower you had just to get a simple order right. It didn't help that every single entitled customer likes to treat fast food employees like they're human trash. When you're just trying to earn an honest living, the thought makes you absolutely furious, which is why your manager told you to clock out. Are you fired? You have no idea. You don't even bother asking. Honestly, you don't even care, because you don't care about much right now. By some miracle, you managed to drive home without wrecking. But again, you're alarmed at just how little of the trip you actually remember. You hope it's just your ever-worsening short-term memory and not because you fell asleep behind the wheel. You should eat, but you're not really hungry anymore. You're just tired. But amidst the exhaustion, you suddenly get a small jolt of energy. That's your body pumping sugar reserves into your system to boost your abilities temporarily. At this point, even your body has started to realize that something is seriously wrong. It's switching to fight or flight mode, believing you're in a life-threatening situation, preventing you from sleeping. T plus 42 hours with no sleep. The short-lived energy boost is gone. All that's left is a sense of apathy. It's becoming difficult to concentrate on anything, even your favorite shows. Everyone in your house is giving you a very wide berth because you're not just irritable anymore, you're downright obtusely stubborn. Things are definitely your way or the highway, as your ability to cooperate and reason with people all but diminishes. Your lack of sleep is effectively shutting down your ability to conduct higher brain functions, and you're reverting to a more base, primitive state. If you can't sleep, you can at least boost your energy. You need some Red Bull. It doesn't matter that the store is several blocks away or that you almost crashed your car a dozen times on the way home. You need that Red Bull, and you need it now. It takes you a few attempts to get the key into the ignition, your hand-eye coordination coordination is seriously off, but soon the car's revving to life and you're off to the store. Luckily, it's all residential roads to the store, and traffic is extremely light. For a moment, you panic thinking about a kid's ball bouncing into the street and the unaware kid rushing out right in front of you. You try and be hyper alert and replay the imaginary incident over and over in your mind until finally, in your mental fog, you suddenly aren't sure if you were imagining it or if it really happened and you just don't remember it. In a blind panic, you pull the car over and rush outside to inspect the front of the car, and a wave of relief washes over you as you realize there's no dents. It was just in your head. As you drive back home from the store, though, you swear that you're starting to see that kid and his ball playing in the yards of the homes you're passing by. It doesn't matter that, physically speaking, the same child couldn't possibly be in different yards at the same time. It doesn't matter that none of this makes any sense. To your sleep-deprived brain, this kid and his ball are as real as the car in front of you. Oh crap, there's a car in front of you! You didn't even realize the other car has hit its brakes until you smash right into the back of it. In a blind panic, you put the car into reverse and speed off. Wait, what? Did you just flee the scene of an accident? Why didn't you just exchange information? What in the world are you even doing? None of this helps and instead just makes you more panicked and paranoid. You gotta get home, and you gotta get home fast, and you gotta hide the car. T plus 48 hours with no sleep. You just dozed off. You woke up with a startled jump. What just happened? You were trying to do the dishes and just sort of dozed off. That's when the pain hits you. You left your hand in the running hot water. But if you're honest, it doesn't even hurt that much. Just like your other senses, even your ability to feel pain is dulled. From the sink, you can see out of your kitchen window and into the driveway where you hastily parked and threw a tarp over your car. Why'd you do that? Oh, that's right, you hit a kid on the way home. Huh? No, you got into a fender bender. Wait, why did you run away from a fender bender? It doesn't matter. Well, it does, but your brain can't process the consequences right now. Your family is gone, took off for the weekend, and decided you and your bad attitude could use the time alone. Where did they go, though? Try as you might, you can't quite remember. Oh well, doesn't matter. Might as well see what's on the… Huh? Oh, crap, you fell asleep again. Those micro-sleeps are lasting 30 seconds to a minute, and they're totally out of your control. Your brain is literally hijacking control away from you in a desperate bid to save itself. You're more of a passenger than the conductor right now. T plus 60 hours with no sleep. You don't know this, but inside your body an infection is taking hold. Luckily, it's just the common cold. But the immune system cells responsible for destroying foreign invaders are not reacting as quickly as they should be. It's like every function of your body is experiencing the same sluggishness and confusion that you are, leaving your immune system greatly compromised. You're hearing things. Sometimes you'll hear snippets of conversation that you remember from long ago, and for just a moment you believe you're back in that time and place, only to turn around and instead of seeing the speaker standing there, there's nothing. You're hearing ghosts created by your own slowly degenerating brain. The barriers between memory and present are getting muddled. You're also starting to sense presences that are clearly not there. You've heard ghost stories before and people speaking about being able to sense the dead in the room with them, despite not being able to see anything. It's a lot like that, and you can swear there's people in the room with you, even whirling around expecting to catch them standing right behind you, but there's no one. It's all in your sleep-starved mind. Your brain is starting to lose its ironclad grip on reality, misinterpreting sensory data and sometimes creating completely false data on its own. You are turning into a very badly glitching computer. T plus 72 hours with no sleep. You have an unbearable urge to sleep, and yet for some reason are unable to. At this point, you know most people can't prevent themselves from sleeping anymore as the brain literally shuts down. For some reason though, your brain refuses to allow you to sleep. Your mood is impossible, and you're glad nobody's around. The slightest provocation would set you off, even if the only other humans to interact with are the ones on the TV. It doesn't matter, because even their offenses are as real to you as if they were physically in the room with you. You try and take a break and play some video games, but your hand-eye coordination is all but completely lost. You're hungry, but not nearly as hungry as you should be, and you find that you're rarely eating. T plus 96 hours with no sleep. You don't quite recall the last time you used the bathroom. You don't really know when the last time was you ate. Maybe a day ago? It doesn't matter. You're not that hungry or thirsty, really, despite your dry, cracked lips. You're dehydrating, and soon you'll be starving, but you honestly don't care. You don't even feel like you need to eat anymore. Besides, if you need a meal, you can just ask your mom to make it for you. She's standing right there in the kitchen, leaning against the closet door. She's been standing there for hours, but when she doesn't answer your questions and you go ask her why, you realize you've been staring at a broom the entire time. There's something funny about that, and you giggle. Normally, experiencing such a dramatic hallucination would be alarming, but honestly, you just don't care anymore. T plus 168 hours with no sleep. How long is your family saying they'd be gone for? Just the weekend, right? Sure seems like they've been gone a long time. You have no idea how many days have passed, but you're pretty sure it's been more than 3. You're fully in the grip of sleep deprivation psychosis at this point, and your hallucinations are just as real as the physical world. They don't always make sense, and they don't always materialize in dramatic fashion. Sometimes it's just strange sounds sounds you hear. More often, it's your confusing household objects for people, like the old coat and hat on a coat rack trick from cartoons. Your sense of smell seems to be off as well. The garbage has been stacking up for a while. Now, you totally forgot which day was garbage day, but it's almost like your nose chose to focus on only specific scents and ignore the rest. It's not all that bad, really. You can smell the citrus smell of oranges coming from the garbage while blocking out the smells from all that rotting food. You don't even realize that the house absolutely stinks now, or you haven't showered in weeks. Or is it days? You're not sure. You just sort of confused all the time. T plus 264 hours with no sleep. You just realized why your family's weekend getaway was taking so long. You don't live at home anymore. In fact, you live alone, without roommates, which is a good thing, because both you and the house are in horrible disrepair. Also, you're pretty sure you're fired from your job. You're not really awake, but definitely not asleep. You exist in a sort of twilight state. Normally, it would alarm you to realize that you've basically invented a false reality of still living at home with your parents, but you aren't nearly aware enough to care. At least you're eating, but only because you have to. Thank God for Postmates, because the thought of cooking is overwhelming to the point of being painful. Your confusion is so intense you find yourself stopping in the middle of tasks with no memory of starting them, or why. The hallucinations have become so frequent you've basically learned to simply ignore them. They're mostly auditory, with past conversations replaying so vividly you could swear they were happening right now, and random tones and sounds that make no sense but are completely real to you. You're well past the stage of microsleeps. You're drifting into moments that can at best be described as wakeful sleepness. Your body and mind are definitely awake, and you just sort of drift into nothingness as you stare blankly ahead of you. But it's not the sleep your brain so desperately needs. You don't know how long you can keep this up, and honestly, neither does science. You've officially reached the world record for sleep deprivation, and every hour ahead of you is uncharted territory. What you know from animal experimentation is that sleep deprivation will, without a doubt, eventually kill you. Brain functions break down to a degree that organs begin shutting down. Just like a faulty computer network, the brain gets increasingly glitchy until finally it simply can't command the organs to continue life-preserving functions. How long until you simply shut down and die? Nobody knows for sure, but to your confused mind, it doesn't really matter. There are an estimated 110 million landmines left in the world, unexploded and just waiting for the wrong person to wander by, sometimes even decades after the conflict that saw them laid down is over. Mines don't discriminate and kill long after the fighting is stopped. They're difficult to detect, even more difficult to safely clear out, and often their presence alone simply forces people to abandon entire towns and villages. In Afghanistan, some areas of the country have been mined so frequently by different powers that the mines lay in layers, like geological layers of the earth. And in the former Yugoslavia, you can still find mines disguised as children's toys along stream banks, with soldiers releasing them by the dozens into the fast-flowing waters so they would kill and maim their enemies downstream. If you're a world traveler, there's always the risk of stepping off the beaten path and into a literal danger zone. And today, we're going to find out how you can get yourself out of a minefield. Mines come in a variety of different types. Some are designed to destroy vehicles and others are meant to kill or maim personnel. In combat, a wounded enemy is better than a dead enemy because the casualty will force other soldiers to risk their lives to save their comrade. Thus, many anti-personnel mines aren't made to outright kill an individual, but rather just to simply maim them. Anti-vehicle mines are designed to take out heavy trucks, tanks, and you could stand on top of one or even do jumping jacks and never set it off. Even more sinister, some mines are designed to detonate only on the second or third activation, thus killing or wounding soldiers who travel along paths thought safe from mines. Generally speaking, mines come in two varieties. Anti-vehicle mines direct an upward explosive blast meant to penetrate the soft underside of a vehicle, while anti-personnel mines explode and generate a great deal of shrapnel so as to inflict maximum injury. Some mines, such as the American Claymore mine, are set up above ground, but most mines are buried by dirt layers so as to make them more difficult to spot. Modern mines can be deployed by aircraft, and some are even able to self-bury in loose soil a few inches. Other mines, typically those employed by terrorist or asymmetrical forces, are little more than disguised IEDs, and historically these have taken the form of children's toys or objects that appear valuable. These are designed to kill and wound civilian populations rather than military personnel, and are particularly insidious in their design. The average mine responds to downward pressure, triggering off a pound per square inch sensitivity limit that is preset by the manufacturer or the mine layer. some modern mines can have their sensitivity adjusted so that they only respond to greater amounts of pressure. This way, they avoid being detonated by small animals or children and will instead detonate when a soldier steps on them. Most mines simply detonate their explosive while on the ground, while others contain a small amount of explosive charge which boosts the mine up into the air before a secondary explosion in the main body showers the area in lethal shrapnel. The infamous German S-mine, or Bouncing Betty from World War II, is the best example of one of these self-elevating mines and proved to be wickedly effective at causing mass casualties. These mines generally achieved a lower absolute kill count, but instead achieved a far greater casualty count, and often this is the preferred outcome. In combat, it's better to wound many enemies than kill a few, as it will lower the amount of firepower your enemy can bring to bear and force him to divert resources to care for the wounded. So, what could you do if you found yourself stuck in the middle of a minefield? How could you get out and survive with most of your limbs intact? First is the most obvious. Turn around and retrace your steps, making sure that you step exactly in the same spot you did when you were blindly walking into the minefield. This is, of course, not a foolproof strategy. As mentioned before, some mines are designed to detonate only on the second activation. And so just because you didn't blow up the first time you wandered into the minefield, it's no guarantee you won't blow yourself to bits on the way out. The best thing to do is to stand absolutely still and call for help. If you wandered into a minefield, then there's probably a good chance that there's someone in the local area whose job it is to clear mines. Let's say you're all alone though, and simply staying put is not an option. Well, we're not gonna lie to you. Getting out of an active minefield alive, or with all 4 limbs intact, is going to be a pretty slim proposition. Despite what you may have seen in the movies, it takes trained experts many days to successfully clear even just a small portion of a minefield. You, on your own, are probably not going to fare so well. If you've got no other options though, well, you could try and mark your own way out from the minefield. You've probably seen it on TV, a soldier crawling on his belly, feeling the dirt in front of him with his knife for mines, and marking off when his trusty knife clinks into one just below the surface. Well, it's better than nothing, but in all likelihood, this is probably still going to get you killed. However, probably is a better bet than definitely, so go get your trusty knife, or find yourself a nice long and thin branch that's hopefully within arm's reach. Now, mines respond to downwards pressure, so if you prod into the dirt in front of you at a 45-degree angle, and make sure you do it nice and easy, you have a decent chance of not setting off the mine you eventually prod into. If possible, you instead want to slowly prod the dirt in front of you with your stick to a depth of about a foot. And then if you hit nothing, move your stick while still buried in all 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. You ideally want to bump into a mine from the side while your stick is still buried, because even coming down on a mine at a 45-degree angle can be fatal. You should be able to feel a pretty firm resistance from a mine when your buried stick bumps into it, and trying to move your stick gently along the edges of it will let you know if you've truly hit a mine or just a rock. This is going to be an incredibly slow and painstaking work. Remember how we told you that it takes professionals days to clear a small minefield? You're going to want to keep clearing the dirt in front of you inches at a time. Every time you sink your probe into the dirt, try to move it about 2 inches in each direction. Then if all clear, move 4 inches to the left or right of where you were and do it again. Once you've cleared half a foot or so laterally in front of you, move your probe 4 inches ahead of you and do it all over again. Think of it like a typewriter, and you're clearing the ground in front of you row by row. Once you've cleared a few feet like this, you have to make a decision. How badly do you need to get out of this minefield? Are you injured and in need of medical attention? Are you in some kind of danger, other than, blowing up at any second from buried mines? If you need to beat a hasty retreat out of the minefield, you can use a technique to attempt to clear a path in front of you after you've cleared out a few feet with your probe. First, you're going to want to lower yourself to the ground in the area you've cleared. Then take something heavy as you can find, and prepare to throw it ahead of you. This works best if you have a rope you can use to throw it far and then pull it toward you, dragging out a path which should detonate any buried mines. You'll want to lay on the area of ground you've cleared with your feet toward the direction you're throwing your pack, because your head is more important than your feet, and you'll want to protect it from any exploding shrapnel. By staying low, you'll avoid much of the shrapnel flying through the air as the mine explodes outwards, and should avoid the majority of the worst effects of a self-elevating mine, such as the infamous Bouncing Betty. So hopefully you have a backpack and a length of rope, because you're going to throw that backpack as far as you can ahead of you and quickly lay down with your feet toward the backpack. Then simply drag the backpack toward you and hopefully set off any mines in your way. Remember, though, not all mines go off on the first activation, so repeat this process a few times if nothing goes off. After the third or fourth time, you got yourself a path that is maybe clear of mines. We have to stress that in no way is this technique perfect, but it beats dying of exposure or of your wounds if stuck in a minefield. The sad truth is that outside of specialized equipment, even the best trained and armed soldiers in the world can do little to save themselves when stuck in a minefield. Odds are then that you, with no training and no equipment, are probably going to fare much worse. The techniques we highlighted in this video are in no way perfect, but if push comes to shove, they are the best chance you've got of making it out alive from a very terrible situation. Odds are that you've seen the movie Jaws, and now every time you get into the water, you can't help but feel a bit nervous about what may be lurking unseen around you. You push these fears out of your mind, try to have fun and enjoy the waves, but you can't help yourself from looking around once in a while for a telltale shark fin. Yet it turns out that while you're worried about being attacked by a shark, the sneaky crocodile you were never expecting is already on his way to eat you. Every year, about 5 to 6 people die from shark attacks, while humans kill up to 100 million sharks, which basically is the most one-sided war since the French surrender in World War II. Yet crocodiles have been regularly making a meal out of humans at a rate of 200 times greater than sharks. And every year, crocodiles and alligators kill an estimated 1,000 people around the world. Most of those fatalities occur in Africa, though many Floridians and Australians have also met their end in the jaws of these prehistoric monsters. And we do mean prehistoric, by the way, as sharks and crocodiles are two of the only known large animal species to be so evolutionarily perfect at their jobs that they haven't evolved much since the age of dinosaurs. Also, while the dinosaurs totally wimped out and died to a measly asteroid the size of New York City, sharks and crocodiles both pretty much shrugged off the global apocalypse and survived to terrify future generations of mammals who would take over the world. Crocodiles are pretty terrifying stuff, and if you've seen our episode Shark vs. Crocodile, Who Would Win?, then you already know that saltwater crocs can grow to be much bigger than even a great white shark, reaching up to a whopping 20 feet long and weigh over 2,000 pounds. At those sizes, you're no longer dealing with a crocodile, and we don't care what scientists say here because any reptile that big is a freaking dinosaur. Scientists actually believe that crocodiles never stop growing, and their maximum lifespan is unknown. And it's believed that crocodiles simply continue growing until they've grown so large that they can no longer hunt successfully or simply succumb to disease. As if size wasn't enough, crocodiles also have the greatest bite strength of any animal in the world, with the Nile crocodile clocking in at an astonishing 5,000 pounds per square inch, which is almost 3,000 times more powerful than your measly bite. Saltwater crocodiles, which grow to be the biggest in the world, thankfully have a lower bite strength of around 3,700 pounds per square inch. That's thanks to the massive concentration of jaw muscles crocs have, which is critical for an ambush predator that needs to ensure it can grip prey and never let go. After all, crocs don't have hands, at least not yet. We're sure evolution is working on this though, since Mother Nature is apparently dead set on making crocodiles the most terrifying animal in history. So don't be surprised if crocs in the future get opposable thumbs and learn to use guns. So what happens if one of these prehistoric killers decides to make you its next snack? How can you survive a crocodile attack? Well, we have to be honest with you and just say that if you're attacked in the water, things aren't going to go well for you at all. If a crocodile happens to snatch you while you're swimming or just standing in knee-deep water, odds are incredibly low that you're going to escape with your life. If you saw our previous video on Gustav the killer crocodile, then you're already aware that this massive beast would regularly snatch fishermen who were only in water up to their knees and drag them away before they could react. In water, crocodiles are incredibly fast, and that's thanks to their massive tail and its powerful muscles. With a single flick, a crocodile can push itself off a sandbar and into deeper water, and given how powerful those jaw muscles are, there's likely little you'd be able to do about it. On land, crocodiles are much slower, though some species and smaller members are capable of surprisingly quick and short sprints. So don't get into the habit of taunting a land-bound crocodile, because if you get too close, it can and will snatch you up. The reason why survival is so unlikely if you're attacked in water is simply down to two quirks of crocodilian hunting behavior. This may be surprising to hear, but crocodiles don't actually use those massive jaws to kill, simply to maintain their grip on prey. Crocodiles are actually incapable of chewing, so while a shark will come in for a bite and then shear chunks of flesh off of you, a crocodile will latch on once and then dive deep down. Since a croc can't kill you with its jaws, it instead tries to drown you. So as soon as you're attacked, the crocodile is going to dive down as deep as it can go and then hold you there. If you do manage to start successfully fighting back though, some crocs will simply decide that better than losing their prey entirely, they'll simply take what they can. This will have the crocodile begin a feeding behavior known as a death roll, and it's basically exactly what it sounds like. The crocodile maintains its grip on the prey and then simply uses its powerful muscles to twist around over and over again, eventually shearing off large chunks of flesh. Crocodiles in danger of losing their prey have been known to engage in this behavior, and we don't have to tell you that this isn't going to end very well for you or your limbs. So the first step in surviving an attack is to simply avoid it altogether. Never go swimming in unfamiliar areas or places that have been marked as unsafe for swimmers. No, ignoring that no swimming sign isn't going to make you look like a cool rebel that society can't keep down. It's just going to turn you into gator bait. Crocodiles and alligators tend to live around the tropical areas of the world, so make sure if you visit or live in those areas, you always stay within designated safe swimming zones. And if you live in Australia, the best way to avoid a crocodile attack is to simply never leave the house. Seriously. Australia is a madhouse of all the world's deadliest animals and insects, and human beings have no business living there. So just stay indoors and upload your consciousness to the Matrix, where the wildlife can't get to you. You should always be careful when around the habitat that crocodiles inhabit. This means that swampy or marshy area, and can include lakes, ponds, rivers, estuaries, canals, and even swimming pools, as many Floridians regularly discover. You'll usually find crocs in slow-moving water that has a lot of mud and vegetation, which provides the perfect opportunity for an ambush predator like a crocodile to attack from. However, saltwater crocodiles aren't so named for nothing, and they can be found on ocean beaches and even in open water. If you're canoeing or on a boat, don't assume that you're safe, as crocodiles have been known to overturn boats and even snatch people right off a boat and drag them into the water. Lastly, try and avoid the water near dusk or at night, because this is when crocodiles are most active, though remember they can and do strike during the daytime as well. If you do notice a crocodile, however, or if you perhaps happen to fall into the water with crocodiles in it, try your best to remain calm. Crocodiles are naturally attracted to small animals splashing in water, so you want to swim as quickly but as quietly and calmly as possible back to shore, while causing as little disturbance in the water as you can manage. Staying under the water is even better, as it'll reduce the amount of splash you make as you swim. Don't become panicky as you swim, and do your best to remain calm. Crocodiles, like many predators, are surprisingly wary animals. If prey seems uninjured or unafraid, it often gives many predators second thoughts about launching an attack. After all, they have evolved hunting prey that shows fear, and a prey item that shows a distinct lack of fear is often enough to shake a predator's confidence in launching an attack. This might seem silly, but from the animal's point of view, hunting is an incredibly risky activity. Any stray wound could possibly lead to infection and be fatal. An injury could prevent the animal from hunting, as could damage its teeth and claws. If the animal can't hunt, it'll starve to death, and thus predators are surprisingly risk-averse creatures. If you remain calm and collected, there's a chance a prowling crocodile might decide that you're more trouble than you're worth. If you happen to run into a crocodile on land though, once more remain calm and then slowly walk backwards. Again, staying calm might deter an attack, but trying to make a panicked run for it will typically trigger the hunt response in most predators. At that point, you're doing exactly what its prey has always done, and the predator pretty much figures out that you're no different and pose little threat. A confident animal, however, is an animal to be feared, and the crocodile might figure that you have some defenses or a strength it's not aware of. If, however, the crocodile does snap or start to charge you, now it's time to run as fast as you can. You might have heard that you should run in a zigzag pattern because crocodiles can't zigzag very well. And this is true, they really can't, but this also makes you much slower. And if the crocodile is smart enough to stay on a straight trajectory, it'll outrun you. On land, crocodiles can top out at around 10 miles an hour, and you'll be able to outrun that no problem if you simply run straight. If a croc nabs you though, then it's time to fight back and fight hard. Crocodiles are covered in a thick armor plating of hard scales, and underneath that is nothing but thick muscle. Even if you have a knife, you're simply not going to do much damage to a crocodile, and they've been known to resist even high-caliber bullets, such as those from a 7.62mm rifle. Instead, you're going to want to go for the first obvious vulnerable spot on the crocodile, which are the eyes. While a croc's eyes are protected by a nictitating membrane that protects it from water debris, it won't be enough to prevent you from placing a well-aimed eye gouge. If your hands are free and you can reach, the best thing to do is dig your fingers as deep into its eyes as you can manage, though even just kicking at the eyes has been known to get a crocodile to let go. Again, crocodiles, as any other predator, don't want to risk permanent damage on a single hunt. It's just not worth it, and if the crocodile's afraid of losing its eyesight, it'll more often than not let go. Gouging or kicking at the eyes has saved many lives in the past. If you can't quite reach the eyes though, then concentrate on striking the top of the head, closer to where the jaws begin. If you're a bystander in a crocodile attack, grab a stick or even just use your fists and wail away at the croc's head. Like any animal, crocodiles don't much like having their bell rung. Let's say the worst has come to pass though, and the animal now has you under the water. It's now waiting for you to drown, and your best chance to survive the attack at this point will be to return the favor. Crocodiles have a structure in the back of the mouth just behind the tongue known as the palatal valve. This is a flap of tissue which completely covers their throats when they submerge, so that the animal can still have prey in its jaws and not drown itself by having water pour down its throat. You're going to ignore how terrifying it'll be to reach even deeper into the mouth of the animal and feel for this flap of tissue. Then simply strike it or grab at it. Puncturing it or even just moving it out of place will be enough to start to cause water to flow down the croc's throat, and this will automatically trigger the crocodile to let go of you so it doesn't drown. There you have it, our easy-to-follow steps on how to survive a crocodile attack. Now there's only one thing to do, get out there and test them. Just kidding, seriously, follow our advice and stay out of the water in the wild. If you're longing for the beach, just throw some sand in your tub and splash around in it, because nobody has ever been attacked by a crocodile in their own bathtub. Day 1. It began and spread with alarming speed. For years after this day, you and other survivors will try to piece together any and all information you can remember and figure out when it happened, where, or even how. Some will think it was another virus flown in on a public airline flight. Others are sure it started right here in the US. Yet others think it just happened all over the world all at once. On day 1, chaos reigns in cities around the world. Many people try to flee, only to end up getting stuck in traffic or huge freeway blocking accidents and ending up as zombie bait. You're smart though. You're a devoted infographics fan after all, so you know the best thing to do if you aren't already in the outskirts of the city is to shelter in place. In case of nuclear attack, you want to get as low as possible and take shelter at the very core of a building, far from doors and windows as you can get. However, in a zombie apocalypse, it pays to have the high ground, so you'll enter the nearest high-rise and make your way up as far as you can go. Power will soon fail, and with it the elevators, which means you'll have to climb dozens of flights of stairs to get up high. But that also means a zombie will too. Barricading every door you come across, any zombie or hostile group of survivors would have to cross a gauntlet of blocked doors to get to you. And being that high up will help you avoid the attention of both zombies and marauding looters, who might arise with the collapse of civilization. Every office tower in America is going to be stocked with food and water, so you're set to ride out at least a week, maybe 2, as you wait for the events to unfold below you. Maybe this is only a local event and the military will soon respond to contain the situation, or at least fly out survivors. Just in case, you make sure to get to the roof of the building and make it clear to any airplanes and helicopters that survivors are inside. It's relatively easy to set up a big SOS using brightly colored objects looted from amongst the upper floors. Like an ancient king watching a siege of his castle from the tower, you spend the day waiting and watching as the city below you comes apart at the seams. Day 3. As predicted, not a single zombie even attempted to make the climb up to your temporary shelter. Why would they when the streets are still swimming with poorly prepared survivors trying to make a run for it, or hiding out in bad street-level shelters? By now, it's become obvious that this is not a local event. This is it, the zombie apocalypse and the end of the world. There's been no response from the military, and before the electricity died and your phone with it, the last thing you heard on social media was that the president had declared a state of emergency and taken shelter in an emergency bunker. The reason for no military response is because military bases were as overrun with the Walking Dead as any city. Some areas have been made secure, but there's still far too much chaos to coordinate anything more than local defense. It'll be weeks, maybe even months, before there's any major attempt to lift zombie sieges of the big cities, if it ever happens at all. There's tens of millions of the undead, and their ranks grow with every freshly slain human. You take stock of your food and water. Before the power went out, you filled up every sink, pitcher, container, even the toilets that you could find with fresh drinking water. You need water far more than you need food, though thankfully your food supply is pretty robust. Every office tower in America has multiple small kitchens, snack bars, and most even have restaurants. For the moment, food and water won't be your problem, but you can't stay here forever. Use your time wisely, so you set out rain catches on the roof of the building and keep your SOS signal free of any debris to make it clear survivors are inside. A few others from around the office building have joined in with you, and you've got the start of a small group of survivors. In a disaster, it's important to keep people occupied so they don't despair or do something stupid. So you take a leadership role and assign people tasks. The first is to fashion some kind of effective weapons and protection. You can take a cue from prison inmates and use duct tape and reams of paper to fashion some pretty sturdy body armor for yourself. Infection spreads via biting, so you make protection for your arms and legs as well. The armor can make you stiff, so you only make protection for your forearms, thighs, and chest. Just like a real soldier's body armor, you'll have to make sacrifices for mobility. No amount of body armor will stop a swarm of zombies if you're too slow or stiff to sprint or jump to safety. You fashion spears out of mops and brooms. These are great because while they won't do much lethal damage to the walking dead, they can keep them at bay pretty effectively. Sadly, there's just not much you can use for an effective weapon inside an office tower. What you really need is firearms or melee weapons that pack a punch, like baseball bats and axes. Those will have to wait. For now, it's better to avoid a fight altogether if you can help it. You place people on rotating shifts with frequent checks of the stairways that lead up to your shelter areas. In teams of threes, you start to scavenge the floors below you, being very careful with your progress to make sure you don't run into a situation where you can't quickly escape. There's a few straggler zombies up here, perhaps people who changed when the mysterious phenomenon that started this nightmare struck, and they're easy to eliminate. You aim for the head out of habit from listening to years of popular culture, but the truth is, the rest of the body is as vulnerable too. If you shatter a zombie's leg, it can't stand up on that leg anymore. If you smash its arm, it can't climb or grab you. And if you break its spine, then it's stuck on the ground for good. Sure, destroying the brain is good, but breaking bones makes it incredibly difficult for a zombie to actually hurt you. With your spears though, all you can really do is pin one in place while your buddy stabs it in the head. It's a good strategy for the few you run into in the tower, but you know you'll need better weapons to survive in the streets. Luckily, before the electricity went out, you made sure to plot out the location of every gun shop, army surplus store, and police station within a few miles of you. You got a crude map and a plan. You're far ahead of the game versus other survivors. Day 7. Fires started days ago from unattended appliances, car crashes, and other minor incidents that the fire department would normally have attended to. However, nobody's putting out the fires, and it's becoming increasingly dangerous to remain in your tower shelter. Some of the group doesn't want to leave, but you explain to them that if they stay, they will inevitably burn up when the fires reach the building. There's a myriad of underground services and sewage tunnels that crisscross a modern city, and you briefly consider using one of these to get around and avoid zombies. Perhaps if you or anyone in your group actually knew anything about those tunnels, like how to get into them or where they go, it might be a good idea. The reality is though, if you don't have the first idea of how to even get into the labyrinth-like maze under your feet, you'll just have to use the streets. The underground garage has cars, but you have no idea where to find the keys. Besides, cars will draw attention, and it's best to move silently for now. The chaos outside has died down in the last few days, as the zombie all-you-can-eat buffet ran out of easy prey. You consider when to make your move. Daytime will give you much better visibility, but it will also mean the zombies have just as good visibility for you. Instead, you opt to move at night, and make sure everyone is wearing dark clothing. Holding your spears and skirting along the edge of buildings, your first destination is a police station only 4 blocks away from your current location. Sticking to the shadows, you stay out of sight of most of the wandering zombies. The bulk of the walking dead have followed the initial rush of refugees out of the city. They're acting just like any predator would, simply following migrating prey. This is a relief to you because if not, the city would be a guaranteed death trap. There is the occasional zombie you stumble into, but it's easy to overpower 1 or 2 of them at a time with your group's long spears. Arriving at the police station, though, it's obvious others had the same idea as you, as it's even been barricaded. You should have known. Luckily, the world hasn't lost all its good people because the survivors let you in. It's not nearly as safe as your high-rise tower, despite now having access to a few leftover pistols, but it's a little further away from the encroaching fires. However, it's clear to both you and the survivors already sheltering here that this isn't a place you can stay. Not only is the threat of being consumed by the raging fires growing closer every hour, but if you're going to survive long-term, you need renewable food and water, neither of which you can get in the heart of the city. It's clear all of you have to leave, but the question is where. Day 9. After 2 days of deliberating, the group is split on how to proceed. The fires are close now, and you need to leave in the next 24 hours or risk burning to death. One group wants to head toward the nearest military base, hoping it's held out or been reclaimed. This in and of itself isn't a bad idea, but it comes with a pretty big downside. There's bound to be thousands of other people who have the exact same idea, and all you're really doing is fleeing from one large concentration of people to another, which is exactly what the zombies are also doing. If the base is held, it'll likely be very secure at this point. Shambling zombies are simply no match versus modern military weaponry, but that's a very big if at this point. You've got another idea. You've watched infographics for years, and you know one thing about zombies that nobody else does. Without their hearts pumping warm blood around their bodies, zombies can't handle cold. The moment the temperature drops to freezing, even the fastest zombie is going to be a popsicle. You try to explain that to people, that it's no different than sticking a piece of meat in the freezer, but they just don't listen to you. They're sadly too brainwashed from years of characters on TV making really stupid decisions during zombie apocalypses and not doing the obvious, heading north. Agreeing to disagree, you decide to part ways. You and your group load up 2 police SUVs with supplies, mostly food, water, and gasoline. You siphon from other vehicles. Surprisingly, there's not much in the way of weapons or ammo left in the police station, probably because the cops who were here when the world went to hell took it with them as they acted on their own survival plans. Your goal is to get out of the city and head north. Survival depends on you getting as far north as you can go. Day 10. Your 2 groups wish each other luck and drive in opposite directions. The streets are a mess, but you manage to navigate past wrecks and small hordes of zombies. You wisely stay off the freeways, as they're bound to be full of traffic snarls and wrecks, and instead stick to surface streets until you can make it out of the city. Day 12. You took a full 24 hours to get out of the city thanks to having to navigate so many potential roadblocks, and there was no stopping your small convoy for anything but refueling. You're taking shifts driving until you're in open country. And today you raided the first gas station you came across for paper maps of the state and the North American freeway system. Your goal is Alaska, and you need to get there before winter comes or you could get trapped. You're tempted to loot some of the big department stores you drive past, but wisely think twice about it. Sure, they're bound to be full of supplies, but also full of zombies. You need to get out into more rural America before you start thinking about looting big box stores that could potentially be full of dozens of zombies. Day 15. You're making much better progress now thanks to your paper maps. You use them to avoid the freeways and use back roads, where the area is so free of signs of the apocalypse that you could almost swear it had never happened at all. But then you inevitably come across a wreck or the signs of a family having been torn apart and eaten by the walking dead. Still, you're out far enough from major population centers, you take the risk raiding a big box store. You've been mostly hitting small gas stations and convenience stores, but you really need to up your weapon game and it would help to get more food supplies. You enter the building as a team and in formation, no different than ancient Greek warriors would fight. You've been drilling like this during your rest breaks. One of the oldest forms of warfare in the world has come back, and for good reason. It works. Working together, you present a wall of spears to any zombie threat, and easily hack them to pieces without letting them get near you. Those on the first row stick their spears straight out and impale zombies on them, then step aside so those in the second row can lunge forward and deliver the killing blows with axes, hammers, or similar weapons. It's brutally effective, and you see why the ancients fought like this. The #1 rule of zombie warfare is to never split up. So while it would be faster for you to investigate the store as teams, you stick together. You manage to score some badly needed camping equipment, a few rifles, and loads of rounds for each. You also get practical survival equipment like fishing poles and lures. You'll need those for your new life in the cold. Speaking of which, you make sure to snatch up any cold weather gear and first aid kits you can find. Day 25. You've made decent time despite having to keep off major freeways, and it's good because fall will soon be here and the first snow falls not long after that. You made it to Canada, where the situation is much the same as the US. This isn't a national crisis, the zombies don't respect any borders. Some of the group want to stop here, where the weather will be a little better than in frozen Alaska, but you know better. Bad weather is exactly why you're going as far north as you can. You need to stay far away from anywhere temperate for at least a year, maybe 2 to be safe. By that time, any reanimated flesh will have fallen apart due to decay, or zombies will simply have been eaten up by wild predators. Humans kinda suck without guns, so predators like bears, cougars, and wolves will be having a field day, gorging themselves on walking corpses. Then a scary thought hits you. What if those animals become zombies too by eating zombie flesh? Or perhaps by getting bit while taking a zombie down? The thought of a zombie bear sends a chill down your spine and reinforces your decisions. You're going to Alaska for 2 years minimum. After that, nature should have run its course and there shouldn't be many, if any, zombies left. You continue siphoning gas from vehicles you come across and take more than you need for the trip. You don't know how many vehicles you'll encounter in rural Alaska, so you'll need plenty of gas for the future. In a dry, cool environment, gasoline can last for a few years before going bad due to oxidation, so you should be fine storing it even over the winter. You do pick up plenty of fuel stabilizer though from gas stations and mechanic shops you run across, as you'll need it for storing gasoline long term. You also grab spare tires. There's a very real risk of tire rot while vehicles are kept in storage. Just ask the Russians inside Ukraine. Day 40. The journey's been a lot slower than it would normally be using freeways, but you've managed to beat the winter to Alaska. Now it's a matter of finding a good place to shelter. Luckily, coastal Alaska is full of a lot of small resort communities or clusters of cabins for tourists to rent during the spring and summer. And the coastal waters off of Alaska are rich in all kinds of edible sea life. There's rivers everywhere, which are also teeming with fish. It's the last truly untouched place in North America, and life is abundant here. You pick a small cluster of cabins on the coast, not too far from a river, using a tourist attraction map you can find in most motels or gas stations. You also pick up plenty of canned goods that you can add to your sizable stockpile in the back of both SUVs. You never hunted before, and the last time you went fishing you were a kid. It's going to be a huge learning curve, but one that you can pick up with time. Until then, you're going to have to supplement your diet with canned goods, especially during the long, freezing winter. Humanity has thrived in every environment on Earth except Antarctica for thousands of years, though. You come from one of the greatest survival success stories in history, even if modern living has dulled your edge. If your ancestors could do it, though, so can you, especially with the help of modern rifles and fishing poles. As far as the zombie threat, not only is your location remote, but as predicted, when the temperature falls, the zombies you do come across in supply and scouting runs all start to slow down. Without warm blood coursing through their veins, the zombies get gradually stiffer and stiffer as the temperature plummets, and killing them is easy as smashing them into bits while they try to lunge at you in slow motion. It's going to be tough surviving up here in Alaska, but if anything ends up eating you here, it's going to be a bear, wolves, or Bigfoot, but definitely not a zombie.
According to statistics we just made up, you have an 85% chance of running into a serial killer in your life. So with a practical guarantee that one day you'll be in a fight for your life against a madman, how can you survive a serial killer? We took to researching previous serial killer survival accounts and even asked some security experts to come up with their ultimate serial killer survival guide. Survival tip number 1, get fit. This one's a no-brainer, but the less physically fit you are, the less chance you'll have of surviving an encounter with a serial killer. Most people who survive being attacked do so either by fighting off their opponent or putting up so much resistance that their would-be killer simply gives up and moves on to easier prey. In fact, just looking like you'd be difficult to handle can make a killer take a hard pass on you. Taking a basic self-defense course is not a bad idea either. You don't have to be a martial arts master to fight off an attacker, but there's some very basic self-defense moves that are devastatingly effective, especially against an unwary attacker who may not be expecting you to fight back. Basic palm, elbow, and knee strikes can mean the difference between life and death. The most important reason to get fit, however, has nothing to do with fighting back. It's so you can run away. Any serious self-defense expert in the world will tell you that the very best way to win a fight is to never have to fight it in the first place, which means putting your running shoes on and doing your best Forrest Gump impression as you flee for your life. It may not look very badass, but getting yourself killed is also not very badass. So take our advice and run. Getting fit can also help you survive an attack that you couldn't fight off or avoid. A survey of 40 serial killer survival stories found that 20% of them had survived by being left for dead by the killer. If you're in good physical shape and your body is strong, you have a better chance of surviving an attack and lasting long enough to be discovered, or to crawl to get help after you're left for dead. But physical fitness is only one part of the equation, because mental fitness is just as important. Life and death situations are typically survived by the people with extraordinary mental strength, who refuse to give up and die when others would have fallen long ago. Your encounter with a serial killer may be a quick, brief, but very violent affair, or could turn into a days-long struggle for survival. Being mentally tough is as important as being physically fit if you're to survive a serial killer. Survival tip number 2, stranger danger. This should go without saying, but if you want to survive an encounter with a serial killer, don't make their job easier by making yourself a victim. Your mom's age-old adage of not talking to strangers holds true even in your adult years. If somebody's making you uncomfortable, don't hesitate to let them know and put some distance between you two. Many serial killers snared their prey by taking advantage of our instinct to avoid socially awkward interactions. You know the type, someone invites you to do something you don't really want to do, but it'd be rude to decline, so to avoid the awkwardness you relent. It's believed that multiple times Ted Bundy harassed his victims to accept a ride from him as they walked home alone, until finally, not wishing to be rude and off-putting, they accepted and sealed their fate. So get comfortable with saying no. If someone's asking for help and seems to be in an emergency, it's okay to leave your front door locked while you call 911 for them from the inside. Same if someone flags you down and there's no other people around, simply inform them you'll call 911 for them and drive a safe distance away. You should definitely help people when you can, but your safety is a priority. Also, you should be aware of anyone asking for specific personal details about your life. If someone keeps asking about your schedule, what time you get home from work, what time you go to sleep, or the general area where you live, do you have a roommate? Is your neighborhood rural or on a busy street? This is a massive red flag, and you should avoid giving any of those details out. You should also remove yourself from the situation as quickly as possible. Report the individual to an authority figure if possible. Many serial killers have been scared off the hunt simply by being reported to a work or police authority for harassing behavior. The last thing these guys want to do is attract unwelcome attention, which also means that you should be attracting as much attention as you can if you're ever in an uncomfortable situation with a stranger. Maybe that cute guy you met at the bar really is just into you, or he's sizing up you as his next victim. Either way, make sure your friends are aware of him. Draw attention to the two of you throughout your interactions. Basically, create as many witnesses as you can, so if you go missing, everyone's going to be pointing the finger at one person. A serial killer will very quickly change his mind about you and seek out the prey that'll keep him more anonymous. Survival tip number 3. Fight. Serial killers have different methods of operation, with some enacting mindless random violence such as Zodiac, who would shoot people and then drive away, and others who would turn their killing into a ritual like Ted Bundy. While there's little you can do to fight off an ambush attack like Zodiac, ritual serial killers can be seriously dissuaded from their attack if you simply put up enough of a fight. Fighting is going to draw attention to you both, which is the one thing the serial killer fears the most. Be loud, be violent, scream, and call for help. Make as much noise and ruckus as you possibly can. Even if you can't physically overpower your attacker, every second you spend putting up a fight is another second that someone might notice what's going on, or at least make your attacker think that the possibility of discovery is growing. Eventually, all but the most determined killers are probably going to break off their attack and once more go looking for easier prey. In the age of social media, though, you can take your fight to the electronic medium. If a stranger approaches you and is giving you seriously bad vibes, snap a photo of them and post it to your social media. If it's a serial killer, they'll almost certainly break off their attack once they realize they're no longer anonymous. In the age of live streaming, your phone may be your best tool for protection as you strip away the anonymity of a would-be attacker, and they realize that they'll be the prime suspect if you go missing. Nothing turns the serial killer off like knowing that within days of the attack, a photo of their face will be plastered on news bulletins across the country. Contrary to popular belief, serial killers don't want to get caught and go to great lengths to ensure they remain out of law enforcement's crosshairs. Finally, as long as we're talking about personal electronics and social media, if you're going to be somewhere sketchy or are getting seriously bad vibes from someone, share your location with a friend. They'll be able to track you across most platforms and have up-to-date information if you go missing. While a serial killer will likely make you toss your phone right away, even knowing where you were last active can help police catch your killer before you become his next victim. Survival tip number 4. Cooperate. Survival tip number 4 might sound strange, considering we just told you to fight, and you should absolutely fight any and every chance you get. However, there may come a time when cooperation is the better survival strategy. Most serial killers find it easy to kill because in their twisted minds you are not truly human. Perhaps you remind them of a hated parent, or you're of a certain demographic that the killer doesn't consider to be fully human. There can be a million reasons why a serial killer targeted you, but the common theme amongst most serial killers is they don't see their victims as being fully human as they themselves are. In a select number of cases, the victims have actually been let loose by their attacker after they humanized themselves to their would-be killer. Making yourself a real person in the eyes of a killer can sometimes avoid getting you killed, and this means connecting emotionally with your attacker. Not an easy feat to pull off if you're terrified or your killer is insane. A common tactic is to ask questions about the killer's life, history, or family. You can explore hobbies, comment on current events, or even just talk about TV shows or movies. If you can make a legitimate connection by sharing in return parts of your life, like for instance the fact that you're both huge Star Trek fans, the odds of you surviving a serial killer just went up dramatically. The more of a real person you seem to your serial killer, the less odds that they'll go through with the murder. Though there is a fine line, begging for one's life or pleading by talking about the family who depends on you rarely works, and that's because begging behavior typically plays straight into the power fantasy that has led a serial killer to attack you in the first place. You're not going to convince a serial killer to spare you by pointing out that you never really got a good look at their face, or promising you won't tell anyone, or pleading that they spare you because your sick grandma depends on you for support. Instead, you need to make real, honest emotional connections, or at least do a really good job of faking them. Survival tip number 5. Don't fit the stereotype. Our final survival tip is related to avoiding attack in the first place. Serial killers are almost always opportunistic predators, meaning that it's very rare for them to seek out and kill prey that isn't already easy to track, isolate, and kill. This means that people living on the fringes of the mainstream culture are the most vulnerable to being victims of a serial killer. Serial killers like to go for the easiest, most vulnerable, and most disposable prey, what some police authorities have labeled less deads. These are people on the fringes of society, such as the homeless, sex workers, drug addicts, loners, people who, when they're found brutally murdered, are considered less dead than a normal 9-to-5 office worker. It seems it just isn't serial killers who have a problem with dehumanizing people. What this means is avoiding a transient lifestyle or associating with people in fringe cultures is going to seriously reduce your odds of you being attacked. Backpacking solo across Europe may sound like a dream trip, but it's also an open-door invitation for any serial killer looking for someone who, if they went missing, would be difficult to track down and likely wouldn't be reported as missing for a long time anyway. Now, go watch America's Most Evil Serial Killer, John Wayne Gacy, or click this other video instead.